Adolf Hitler neither finished school nor had any vocational training. He occasionally lived in homeless shelters or on the street. He refused to pursue a regular job. To this day, it seems inexplicable that he could come to power. Out of nowhere, Hitler became the Führer, leader of the German Reich, one of the most powerful men of the 20th century who brought the world to the brink of disaster and death to millions of people. The nation worshipped him and followed him blindly into the abyss. But during his lifetime, he kept his origins and his life secret. No one should know how or who he was. Hitler's contemporaries, from his birth to his death, flesh out the picture. Who was Hitler?
On June the 30th, 1903, the 72-year-old Kaiser Franz Josef I visits Braunau am Inn to celebrate its 700th birthday. An historical coincidence. This border town to Bavaria, of all places, is the origin of the oldest film footage shot by an Austrian cinematographer.
In the late 80s of the last century, my parents lived in this small town on the Inn, which is Bavarian by blood and Austrian by nationality. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
The customs inspector Alois Hitler and his family occupy a small apartment on the top floor of the Pommer Hotel in Braunau. At Easter time on April the 20th, 1889, at about 6:30 in the evening, Adolf Hitler is born.
Parish Register, Braunau. Adolphus Hitler, born on April the 20th, 1889, at 6:30 in the evening. Baptized on April the 22nd at 3:15 by Ignaz Probst.
To begin with, there is this picture of little Adolf from the year 1889, a few months after his birth. One thing worthy of note in this first picture of Hitler is the close resemblance of Adolf to his mother. August Kubizek, childhood friend of Adolf Hitler.
Adolf Hitler is the third of the couple's 6 children. He and his younger sister Paula are the only ones to survive beyond childhood. The mother is 28 years old at the time of the birth. The father is 51. Clara Hitler is related to Alois Hitler. She's her husband's second cousin. When Hitler is 3 years old, his father is transferred to a new post and decides to move into an apartment in Passau on the German side of the border. Adolf Hitler lives with his family in Bavaria for 3 years, until 1895.
Actually, Hitler didn't speak a typical Austrian dialect. August Kubizek.
In my youth, my German was the dialect spoken in Lower Bavaria. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
The oldest film recording made in Austria-Hungary was shot by foreigners, the Lumiere brothers. It shows Vienna, the capital of a multinational empire, in the year 1896.
In old Austria, you could travel without a passport, from the Mediterranean, over the Alps, way into the east, the west, and the north. Oskar Kokoschka, painter and writer.
Hitler's ancestry from Lower Austria, as well as a total of 21 years spent in Upper Austria and Vienna, do not suffice to make him Austrian in the sense of a citizen of that nation.
Kurt Schuschnigg, Austrian Chancellor from 1934 to 1938. Austrians who spoke about the nation before 1938 meant the national culture that extended beyond their borders, which is what Austrian man also identified with.
This cultural nation is Germany. Transporting a locomotive through the streets of Chemnitz, 16 workhorses pull the locomotive as the factory has no rail connection. The majority of German-speaking Austrians feel close links to the Germans in Prussia, Saxony, Bavaria, and the smaller federal states already united in a partly industrialized Reich.
He was a grumpy, reticent old man, and, like a lot of political free spirits at the time, a stern German nationalist. Joseph Meyerhofer, farmer in the village of Leonding by Linz.
A visit to his parents' grave. His school friends say his mother was loving and kind-hearted. The father cold, silent and strict. Joseph Goebbels, diary, July 22nd, 1938.
I never loved my father, but feared him all the more. Adolf Hitler, Table Talk, recorded by his secretary, Christa Schröder.
My brother Adolf provoked my father to such extremes that he was beaten every day. Paula Hitler, later Paula Wolf.
In June 1939, Eva Braun films the small farm in the village of Haarfeld in Upper Austria that Hitler's father leases after retiring early in 1895. On May 1, 1895, Hitler starts school in a one-room schoolhouse in the neighbouring village of Fischelham. In the year 1897, Hitler's father sells the farm in Haarfeld. The family lives temporarily in the small town of Lambach. In 1898, the Hitler family moves to the village of Leonding near Linz. Here, Hitler's father buys property number 61, including 1,900 square meters of land. After 5 years at elementary school, in 1900, Adolf Hitler, aged 11, begins secondary school in the city of Linz. Adolf Hitler has to repeat his first year at secondary school due to poor grades.
I remember the scrawny, pale boy who commuted every day between Linz and Leonding fairly well. He was definitely talented on the one hand, but was not in control of himself. He was considered rebellious, and he didn't work hard. Dr. Eduard Hümer, Hitler's French teacher.
The quiet life enjoyed by the Hitler family on its little patch of land only lasted a few years. The head of the family died unexpectedly of a heart attack in January 1903. Max Sixtel, Leonding, the Führer's hometown.
Alois Hitler leaves his modest savings to his 4 surviving children, Alois and Angela from the second of his 3 marriages, and Adolf and Paula. This inheritance is to be paid out when they come of age.
The quiet cemetery of Leonding was his final resting place. His widow moved to the nearby city of Linz for the better educational opportunities for her children. Max Sixtel.
In 1904, Clara Hitler has to send her son Adolf, who due to bad grades is again in danger of not moving upper class, to the state secondary school in Steyr, 40 kilometers away.
Look at my school grades. I had bad marks in German. That idiot of a professor spoiled the German language for me. I would never be able to write a proper letter.
Adolf Hitler, in the Führer's headquarters, 1943.
Last grades at secondary school in Steyr. Diligence, inconsistent. German, insufficient. Geography and history, sufficient. Mathematics, insufficient. Physics, satisfactory. Freehand drawing, commendable. Sport, excellent.
I don't have a photograph of Adolf Hitler during the years of our friendship. There probably aren't any photos of Hitler during this period. Everything that could be said about images of Hitler as a young man has already been said, were it not for the drawing by a classmate from the 4th grade of the junior high school in Steyr. By chance, this drawing, done in 1905, was preserved. The boy could only draw profiles. Nevertheless, there is something peculiarly fascinating about this pencil sketch. August Kubitschek.
After 9 years, Adolf Hitler finishes school without graduating. For the following 3 years, he lives in Linz on his mother's pension, not really doing anything.
All of his relatives considered him worthless, a person who shied away from any gainful employment from the start. August Kubitschek.
Adolf Hitler talks his mother into allowing him to travel to Vienna. He wants to apply for admission to the general painting class at the Academy of Fine Arts.
From early in the morning to late at night, I ran from one sightseeing attraction to the next. But the buildings were the only things that fascinated me. All of Ring Street affected me like a spell from the Arabian Nights.
Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
From 1904 to 1908, I was Adolf Hitler's only friend in Linz, and thereafter in Vienna. August Kubitschek.
Hitler, who later, in the opinion of a few art experts, was not entirely untalented, manages to pass the first selection, but is turned down after the second.
Adolf Hitler, born in Braunau, Upper Austria, on April the 20th, 1889. German, Catholic, few faces, test drawing unsatisfactory. Classification list of the general painting class.
When Adolf Hitler, disappointed by the rejection, returns to his family in Linz after 8 weeks, Clara Hitler is struck down with a serious illness. She's suffering from a swelling. Nowadays, it would be diagnosed as cancer. For several months, Adolf Hitler devotedly takes care of his mother at home.
Dr. Bloch, well loved by all, was the Hitler family physician. August Kubitschek.
To a great degree, the boy lived in his own world. I have no idea what dreams he dreamt. Dr. Edward Bloch, Jewish physician of the Hitler family.
Clara Hitler dies in the night of December the 21st, 1907, surrounded by her family.
The death of our mother had a great effect on me and Adolf. We were very attached to our mother. When she died, Adolf stopped coming home. Paula Hitler, Adolf Hitler's sister.
In contrast to what Hitler's sister Paula claims later, Adolf Hitler remains in Linz several weeks after the death of his mother. He never tells his family or his friend Kubitschek that he failed the admissions test the previous year.
Apparently, he was having some really bad days. He was easily irritated and gave me short shrift when I started to talk about my studies. August Kubitschek.
In the spring of 1908, Adolf Hitler begins living the life of a wastrel in the metropolis.
Vienna was the most thorough education of my life.
Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
The small inheritance that was diligently managed by his guardian had to cover both the cost of living and his studies. He may have been able to supplement his income through the sale of drawings and paintings. August Kubitschek.
For the next months, there is no trace of Hitler's activities in Vienna. He's broken off contact with his family, and he fails the second entrance test at the Art Academy. He begins to copy street views of Vienna from books, and then sells them as postcards.
I was a young, inexperienced man, without any means of support. Forced to get by on my own, the few kronen, often only cents, from the proceeds of my work were barely enough to pay for my bed and board.
Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
Hitler's share of his father's inheritance is paid out on April the 20th, 1913, his 24th birthday. Hitler met Rudolf Häusler in a men's hostel. With him, he wants to move to the German city of Munich.
He was just full of praise for this city, and at the same time he didn't forget the large beer gardens and radishes, etc. Housemate of Hitler's in 1912.
I had arrived in this town as a boy and departed as a quiet and serious man.
Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
The main reason for leaving Austria is probably that the later Commander-in-Chief Adolf Hitler wants to get out of doing military service. On Saturday, May the 24th, 1913, Hitler and Häusler give notice of departure to the police, but don't state where they plan to live. In Munich, Adolf Hitler has found the city that is to become the centre of his life. He does, however, remain an outsider. His inheritance helps him build an uncertain yet adequate existence on the fringe of society.
It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon in spring. Someone knocked on the door and I answered it. It was a young man wanting to see the room we were renting. I showed it to him and we reached an agreement. Frau Anna Popp, landlady, Schleißheimer Straße 34.
Adolf Hitler and Rudolf Häusler rent a room together from the tailor Popp at 34 Schleißheimer Straße, near the district of Schwabing.
The younger generation that we belonged to didn't know anything about war, but were intoxicated by foreign wars. We had no real idea what war was. Adolf's father had never been a soldier. Now and again, old men would talk about Königgrätz and Kostotze. August Kubitschek.
Diary, Monday, June the 29th, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir apparent to the Austrian throne, has been killed along with his wife. The scum of moral turpitude. Henrietta Schneider, born 1872, housekeeper, East Prussia.
The incident triggers a war in the Balkans that grows to become a world war.
For me, those hours were a release from the annoying emotions of youth. I'm not ashamed to say today that I was overwhelmed with enthusiasm, fell to my knees and thanked the heavens with all my heart that they had given me the good fortune to live in this era. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
On August 2nd, 1914, the day after Germany declares war on Russia, there is a big patriotic rally on Odeonsplatz in front of the Feldherrn Hall. Heinrich Hoffmann photographs the ceremony. Years later, in an enlargement, he discovers a face among the masses, which is presumably Hitler's.
On August the 5th, 1914, I enlisted in the army on a request to His Majesty and entered the 1st Bavarian Infantry Regiment. I was deferred for several days, then transferred to the 2nd Infantry Regiment, and finally assigned to the Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment No. 16 on August the 16th. Adolf Hitler, outline of my person.
For the first time in his life, Adolf Hitler wears a uniform. In the early morning hours of October the 21st, 1914, Hitler's regiment sets out from Munich station in a westerly direction. Shortly after the first combat mission of the List Regiment, Hitler is promoted to Lance Corporal. He will reject further promotions during the course of the war. This would have involved an attachment to other army units, and Hitler would have lost the camaraderie and security of the regimental family.
For the first time, Hitler was part of a bigger community, and with that came the order and structure that spared him the daily struggle to survive. Fritz Wiedemann, Lieutenant.
As of November the 9th, Hitler is deployed as a dispatch runner and assigned to the regimental staff. In the eyes of many soldiers in the trenches, the staff orderlies behind the immediate front are privileged cowards.
Whenever death was on the prowl, a certain something attempted to rebel and appeared to the weak body in the guise of reason, and was in fact only cowardice that was behind this disguise, trying to seduce the individual. By the winter of 1915-16, this battle was already decided for me. The will itself had finally become my complete master. Now fate could put me to the test without me losing my nerves. A young war volunteer had become an old soldier. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
Hitler is respected by his comrades at regimental headquarters, but he remains an outsider. In 5 of 6 photos showing Hitler with his comrades, he's either standing or sitting to one side. Hitler is wounded by British artillery shrapnel on October the 5th, 1916, and is taken to the Red Cross Hospital in Belitz, south of Berlin. By March the 1st, 1917, he's back running dispatches in the regimental staff. In the following months, he participates in combat activities. On August the 4th, 1918, Hitler is awarded the Iron Cross First Class, the highest military honour that soldiers of his rank in the Imperial German Army can receive. The nomination was submitted by a Jewish officer, Lieutenant Hugo Gutmann.
I never got out of Hitler the reason for his fanatical hatred of Jews. The experience with Jewish officers during the World War couldn't have contributed to this. Fritz Wiedemann, Lieutenant.
In the night of October the 13th, Hitler's war service ends in a heavy British barrage.
Mustard gas was used. On a hill south of the city of Wervik, on October the 13th, we came under several hours of artillery fire with gas shells. Already around midnight, some of us dropped out, including some comrades, permanently. In the morning, I too experienced pain that grew stronger every 15 minutes. And at 7 o'clock, I staggered and stumbled back with burning eyes, taking my last message of the war with me. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
After treatment in a mobile army hospital, Adolf Hitler is transported to the Prussian Reserve Hospital in Pasewalk, Western Pomerania. He's been on the front for 42 of the 51 months of the war. Hitler remains in Pasewalk for 28 days, during which the world changes. In the military hospital in Pasewalk, Adolf Hitler and the other patients learn that a revolution has taken place, the monarchy abdicated, and a ceasefire been concluded.
I hadn't cried since the day I stood by my mother's grave. Now, I couldn't stop myself. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
Like everything else in Mein Kampf, this portrayal is a stylization and must be doubted. We don't know whether it was Hitler's will or merely coincidence that influenced his future course from then on. On November the 21st, 1918, Adolf Hitler returns to Munich. He tries to evade demobilization and remain a soldier. There are clashes between supporters of the workers' councils and parliamentary democracy in the state capital. The Social Democratic majority allows right-wing volunteer groups, the so-called Free Corps, to break the power of the workers' councils.
Letter to Clara and Fritz Hess. The volunteer corps made an excellent impression. Without them, we would have been finished in Bavaria. Rudolf Hess, student and member of the Free Corps.
Adolf Hitler keeps his distance to the revolutionary forces, but also to their right-wing opponents. During this period, Hitler grows more radical. He is under the influence of army officers like Karl Mayr, the head of the intelligence battalion.
When I met him for the first time, he came across as a tired stray dog looking for an owner. Karl Mayr, captain of the Reichswehr.
Karl Mayr also finances patriotic parties, like the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, the German Workers' Party, which is founded in Munich on January the 5th, 1919, mainly by a group of railwaymen. On September the 12th, 1919, Hitler, who has in the meantime been demobbed, is sent to spy on the German Workers' Party by Myra, who also provides financial support.
During the discussion, a professor spoke about separatist views. A second speaker then took the floor and, in short, powerful words, demolished the professor. It was Adolf Hitler. Michael Lotter, secretary of the German Workers' Party.
One day, I had the opportunity to talk to a large audience, and what I had always instinctively felt without knowing it turned out to be true. I could speak in public.
Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
In the second half of September 1919, Hitler joins the German Workers' Party and participates regularly in its meetings.
Among the various right-wing radical organizations, the NSDAP was by no means the strongest, but it was the most active and cohesive group. Its significance is solely the result of the effect of Hitler as a speaker. Ernst Hanfstaengl, son of a publisher, acquaintance of Adolf Hitler from 1920.
On February the 24th, 1920, Hitler speaks for the first time in front of more than 1,000 people at the Hofbräuhaus. He also announces the 25-point party program, which is formally valid for a quarter of a century until the demise of the NSDAP.
First, we demand the unification of all Germans in a greater Germany based on the right of self-determination of the people. Second, we demand equal rights for the German people in respect to other nations and the abrogation of the peace treaties of Versailles and Saint-Germain. Third, we demand land and territory for the sustenance of our people and settlement of our surplus population. Fourth, only a national comrade can be a citizen. Only those of German blood can be national comrades, regardless of creed. Consequently, no Jew can be a national comrade.
A few days later, they changed their name from the German Workers' Party to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or NSDAP.
Hitler was the party, and the party was Hitler. Ernst Hanfstaengl.
Because right now, here in Munich, a movement is starting so strong that all young, powerful, and healthy forces are attracted to it. It is the National Socialist German Workers' Party. To make it absolutely clear, we're anti-Semites. Ilse Pröll, later Ilse Hess, from 1921, member of the NSDAP. Letter to her former college teacher.
When the first party congress is held, the Augsburg essay is well represented. At this first public presentation, I get the impression that this has substance. We are not alone. The idea of the fatherland is growing. Karl Wahl, Augsburg, former SA member.
The German economy collapses. In August 1923, hyperinflation sets in.
Everything is getting worse. Famine. A loaf of bread, 140 billion. Then reduced again to 80 billion. Famine, famine everywhere. Käthe Kollwitz, painter and sculptress.
The national associations overestimate their own strength and believe that parliamentary democracy is at an end.
Interview with the Daily Mail newspaper, October the 2nd, 1923. If a Mussolini were to appear in Germany, then the people would fall on their knees and worship him more than Mussolini has ever been worshipped.
Adolf Hitler.
A large revolt from the right in Bavaria with Ludendorff at its head. Henrietta Schneider, District Elk, East Prussia.
Report of the Regional Government of Upper Bavaria, Munich, November the 9th, 1923. The day before yesterday, Hitler promised General von Lossow and Colonel von Seisser personally that he would not undertake anything. The answer to this word of honor was given last night when, with pistol in hand, Hitler extorted a declaration in favor of a national dictatorship from General State Commissioner von Kahr, General von Lossow, and Colonel von Seisser. At the same time, the ministers present were taken into custody by Hitler's people.
Hitler presents his suggestions for new governments in Berlin and Munich and mentions Erich Ludendorff as Führer and chief with dictatorial power over the German National Army. He asks the already drunken audience,
"Do you accept this solution for the German question, of a greater German state?"
Then, as the crowd shouts its agreement, Hitler proclaims,
"Morning will either find us with a national government in Germany or find us dead."
The revolt is intended to put Munich and Bavaria in the hands of the revolutionaries, and then with a march on Berlin to topple the democratic system. The Putschists are counting on defections from the army in Bavaria and the Bavarian police. These, however, fail to materialize. On the morning of November the 10th, 2,000 revolutionaries, some armed, marched from the Bürgerbräu beer hall through the centre of town to Ludwigstrasse at Odeonsplatz. 10 years later, Munich, November the 9th, 1933. Amateur film of a tradition that actually dates from the year of the seizure of power, the annual march of the old fighters of the NSDAP to the Feldherrnhalle. Leading the column, as in 1923, are Adolf Hitler and Hermann Göring.
We retreated to Café Stephanie. People soon came in and said there had been a skirmish on the Odeonsplatz, and the enormous crowd of Hitler men turned and ran away from the state police. Oskar Maria Graf, writer, From My Life.
On November the 12th, 1923, Adolf Hitler is sent to the fortress prison in Landsberg. He is given cell number 7. The leaders of the Putsch are put on trial for high treason in the main lecture theatre of the Central War School on February the 26th, 1924.
Report of the Württemberg Emissary, March the 13th, 1924. I attended one of the hearings myself, and I was upset to see how the observers, who you could clearly see were mostly from circles close to Hitler, used every opportunity to show their support for the accused. Karl Moser von Vilseck.
Letter to Clara and Fritz Hess. Hitler's final statement enclosed. It is one of the best, most powerful speeches that he has ever given. Even those in the courtroom who weren't particularly friendly to Hitler were deeply moved. Rudolf Hess, student.
The verdict is handed down on April the 1st, 1924. All of the accused, with the exception of Ludendorff, are found guilty. In his 13 months in Landsberg prison, Adolf Hitler begins the transcript of a manifesto that portrays his alleged journey through life and his development as a politician, and sets out his worldview.
So I decided not only to clarify the goals of our movement, but also to draw a picture of its development. With that, I also had the chance to give a representation of my own development.
Adolf Hitler, forward to Mein Kampf.
The biographical parts of his book are to a great extent exaggerated and unverified. However, his political goals are deadly serious. His view of the world is voluntaristic. He sees it as he wants to see it. Hitler's political gospel is derived from a primitive Darwinian idea of a struggle for existence. It reflects the permanent fight for survival of all against all, transferred from nature to human society. This struggle is, in his view, a selection process in which so-called high-quality races have a better chance of survival. At its head is supposedly a white person of the Nordic race of Aryans, the founders of culture. Like most anti-Semites before him, Hitler believes in a Jewish race, disguised as a religious community. He sees Jews in history as being parasites in the bodies of other nations, and as contaminators of the blood of the Aryan race.
For hours, the black-haired Jew boy waits to ambush the unsuspecting girl whom he pollutes with his blood and thus steals her from her people. With the same hidden agenda, destroying the hated white race with the inevitable resulting bastardization.
Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
In another chapter, Hitler drafts plans for territorial living space for his Aryan German people.
We are stopping the endless German movement southwards and turning our gaze towards the land in the east. If today we speak of new land in Europe, we can primarily only have in mind Russia and her vassal border states.
Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf.
Diary, January the 14th, 1925. At the end of the month, Hitler wants to call for the re-establishment of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. The only thing to do. Joseph Goebbels.
Hitler's remaining sentence of 3 years, 333 days, 21 hours and 50 minutes is waived according to the pedantically exact court records. On February the 27th, 1925, Hitler re-establishes the party. In the first round of elections for German president on March the 29th, 1925, Erich Ludendorff is the candidate of the NSDAP and other nationalistic groups. He only receives 1.1% of the votes. When Paul von Hindenburg enters the race in the second round of voting, Hitler orders his party to support the aging 77-year-old army general. Hitler and Ludendorff go separate ways. Hitler is now the sole leader of the national camp.
Diary, April the 26th, 1925. Hindenburg elected. Is he the man that Germany needs at this time? Is he not too old? Too easy to influence? Bella Fromm, German Jewish journalist.
From 1924 onwards, the German economy recovers. This leads to the 5 golden years of the Weimar Republic.
Looking back on it now, I see the mad whirl of this Berlin of 1928 and 29 as a kind of Pompeian revel on the eve of the Vesuvian eruption. Sefton Delmer, correspondent of the Daily Express in Berlin.
The Nazis hated culture itself because it is essentially international and therefore subversive of nationalism. Christopher Isherwood, British-American writer.
In the 1920s, Berlin was ahead of everything that was known as new in our field. It had everything. Reinhardt's great theatre, great film studios, great films. The most beautiful bars and restaurants, including gay bars. Berlin was productive and rich with ideas, rich in ideals, and at the same time practical, a combination never achieved before. Marlene Dietrich, actress and singer, memoirs.
Art was no longer a mere ornament of life, but rather its immediate expression. Cubism, futurism, expressionism, whatever you want to call it, this is how we were. This was our world. So shaken and shocked that everything was upside down. Surrealism? Of course, what else? Vicky Baum, writer and journalist.
Despite the lack of political success, the party stages spectacular rallies, first in Munich and Weimar, then from 1927 onwards, exclusively in Nuremberg.
Diary, Nuremberg, August the 4th, 1929. A stampede of people that exceeds our wildest hopes. Outside, the drums are already booming. Torchlight processions, endlessly long. Joseph Goebbels, NSDAP leader of Berlin.
The party conventions are, without question, Hitler's personal work. Just as he was involved in building the SA, from the smallest details of the uniforms to the color of the collar patches, he concerned himself with the planning of the party conventions, right down to the decorations in the Congress Hall. Albert Krebs, NSDAP leader, Hamburg.
Through the city, a triumphant procession. Everyone cheering and throwing flowers. March past, almost 4 hours. A sea of joy and flowers. Joseph Goebbels, diary.
The continuing fragmentation of the party landscape is advantageous for the rise of the NSDAP. In elections, they win more and more support from the splinter and protest parties. After imprisonment in Landsberg, Hitler becomes the sole leader of the nationalist movement. He feels chosen by destiny to show Germany the way to national salvation. Although the party remains unsuccessful at the polls and membership increases only slowly, the personality cult around Hitler is growing. This Führer cult holds the National Socialist movement together across ideological divisions and personal differences. Between 1925 and 1929, Hitler's small political movement is marked by activism, dynamism, enthusiasm, youthfulness and strength. Nearly 60% of new party members are under 30 years old.
Street processions, press promotions, propaganda tours into the provinces created an atmosphere of activism and tension. There were countless clashes and wounded people, even dead people, left in the square. Horst Wessel, autobiography.
In February 1930, one of the casualties will be the Berlin student Horst Wessel.
Durch Fleiß, durch Lernen und ich kann sagen durch Hungern. Langsam durch den Versailler Vertrag planmäßig eingeleitete Gespenst des asiatischen Bolschewismus. Und ich machte damals den Entschluss, größere Erkenntnis zu überwinden.
On November the 16th, 1928, for the first time after the ban on public speaking in Prussia has been lifted, Hitler speaks in the Sportpalast in Berlin, allegedly in front of 18,000 supporters. For the first time, he uses an electroacoustic sound system, speaking into a microphone. And for the first time, his words are clearly understood in every corner of a large space.
Sieg oder Niederlage, der Mittelstand verelendet, die Finanzen, also ist es typisch deutsch, 30 Parteien zu besitzen.
Adolf Hitler neither finished school nor had any vocational training. He occasionally lived in homeless shelters or on the street. He refused to pursue a regular job. To this day, it seems inexplicable that he could come to power. Out of nowhere, Hitler became the Führer, leader of the German Reich, one of the most powerful men of the 20th century, who brought the world to the brink of disaster and death to millions of people. The nation worshipped him and followed him blindly into the abyss. But during his lifetime, he kept his origins and his life secret. No one should know how or who he was. Hitler's contemporaries, from his birth to his death, flesh out the picture. Who was Hitler?
October 1929. Angry autumn after a beautiful summer. Rain and calm weather, and something suffocating in the air. And it wasn't the weather. For the first time on the street, manure-brown uniforms. Sebastian Hafner, journalist, memoirs.
The SPD had won the German elections of 1928 and since then led a coalition government with the middle-class people's parties. This falls apart 1 year after the death of the Liberal foreign minister over domestic policy differences. In 1930, Chancellor Brüning convinces President von Hindenburg to dissolve Parliament and call for new elections 24 months early. Brüning is determined to govern with the help of the president, if necessary, without a majority.
National Socialists were now sitting in Parliament. The rise of the party could no longer be overlooked. Ernst Niekisch, National Bolshevist, Hitler opponent.
Following the example of Italy, at the end of the 1920s, movements which are called fascist are gaining strength all over Europe. In some Eastern European states, dictatorial governments rely on the support of such factions. A union of fascists is also established in the UK. A party demonstration in Manchester in 1934.
Sir Oswald Mosley, founder, British Union of Fascists. In 1930, unemployment had increased to 3,076,000, and the National Socialists then increased their MPs to 108, with a vote of 18%. Less than 3 years later, the National Socialist Party came to power. Unemployment had risen to 6,014,000.
New Year's Order, December the 31st, 1931. The army of brown shirts has multiplied numerous times. The movement has suffered a great deal of blood sacrifice. Comrades, at the beginning of this year, I thank you for everything that you accomplished over the past year through dedicated work and self-sacrificing battles. You can enter the new year with joyful confidence, proud of what you achieved in the year 1931. Adolf Hitler.
After an internal party discussion in Munich on February the 2nd, Adolf Hitler decides to run in the first round of voting in the German presidential elections of March 1932.
Diary, Berlin, February the 16th, 1932. What a strange country in which the presidency must be decided between Thälmann, Hitler or Hindenburg. Thea Sternheim, art collector and author.
Again, it was the politics of toleration when the SPD asked its voters to vote for Hindenburg, and how faithfully they followed. Golo Mann, son of Thomas and Katja Mann.
Diary, Monday, February the 29th, 1932. Who will win? Henriette Schneider, housekeeper.
Election campaign flight, April 1932. Soon Hitler had sunk into morose apathy. He just sat there, staring gloomily out of the window, wads of cotton in his ears. A complete contrast to the glad-hand extrovert man at Tempelhof. As the door of the aircraft was flung open, Hitler ducked out and immediately threw himself into his Führer pose. There he stood, bareheaded, upright and unsmiling, his hand raised in greeting. Sefton Delmer, British correspondent of the Daily Express in Berlin.
Diary, Weimar, April the 10th, 1932, Sunday. Second round of voting in German presidential election. Hindenburg finally elected over Hitler. Harry Graf Kessler, publicist and diplomat.
In June 1932, Franz von Papen, on behalf of Reich President von Hindenburg, forms a right-wing conservative cabinet, which is without a majority in parliament. The new Chancellor hopes for the support of Hitler and, according to Hitler's demand, asks the Reich President to call new parliamentary elections on July the 31st.
Diary, May the 31st, 1932. Lotte is coming on Sunday. She's planning a trip with Karl to Westerland. Yesterday, Brüning resigned. Now what? Henriette Schneider.
The hero of Tannenberg, the hero of the German Republic, had a dull spirit, our grumpy field marshal with his robust conscience. With truly Germanic blind loyalty, he betrayed the pious Chancellor to whom he owed his power. Brüning was fired. His successor, the comparatively liberal General von Schleicher, was soon the target of wild intrigue. Klaus Mann, son of Katja and Thomas Mann.
For far too long, we had been content with laughing and joking about the house painter Hitler. Karl Zuckmayer, German-Austrian dramatist.
Diary, Sunday, July the 31st, 1932. The hatred of the parties is awful. At 10 o'clock, the elections begin, without Wilhelm. He is plagued with neuralgia. Henriette Schneider.
The triumph of the National Socialists in the July elections of 1932 is a Pyrrhic victory.
Diary, August the 1st, 1932. Election results. We have gained a little ground. Marxism has gained a great deal. Now we have to seize power and wipe out Marxism. Either way. Hitler is also of this opinion. We won't get an absolute majority this way. Joseph Goebbels.
As almost all the major parties in the Reichstag want to bring down von Papen's government, Reich President von Hindenburg dissolves the newly elected parliament in September and calls new elections for November the 6th, 1932.
In the German elections of November 1932, the NSDAP won 11.75 million votes, the SPD 7.25 million, and the KPD some 6 million. So together, both workers' parties were a lot stronger than the Nazis. Mannes Sperber, Austrian writer and KPD member at the time.
Many leftists believed that Hitler would never recover from this setback and had ceased to be a menace. Christopher Isherwood, British-American writer.
January the 1st, 1933. Hitler was in a good mood that evening and talkative, like in the old days. Before he left, he added to his entry in the guest book,
"On the first day of the new year."
Then he looked at me and said, with suppressed excitement,
"This year belongs to us."
Ernst Hanfstaengl, head of the NSDAP Foreign Press Bureau.
After Hindenburg had decided against Chancellor Brüning, the president turned his attention to the forces of the great agrarian heavy industry coalition that operated with Hitler against Brüning, his natural allies. He took their view of Hitler. The reconstruction and further expansion of the great agrarian and heavy industry positions of power was to be taken forward. But the power was not to be transferred to the National Socialism. Ernst Niekisch, journalist, National Bolshevist.
Diary, Monday, January the 30th, 1933. Elsa came back from school with the cry, "Heil Hitler!" Then we knew Hitler had become German Chancellor at last. Henriette Schneider.
A fragment of film produced using an early AGFA colour film process. It shows thousands of extras recreating the torchlight procession through the Brandenburg Gate. It is supposed to remind viewers of January the 30th, 1933.
That the Nazis are enemies, enemies for me and for everything dear to me, I was not for a moment mistaken about that. Where I was completely mistaken was how terrible an enemy they would become. Sebastian Haffner.
The majority of his ministers were members of the German National People's Party. He utterly despised the party and was convinced that he would one day be able to rid himself of them. To be able to carry this out, he set one condition to which the German president also agreed. He wanted the power to order new elections. Ernst Niekisch.
Speech in the Berlin Sportpalast, February the 10th, 1933. I cannot divest myself of my faith in my people and stand firmly by the conviction that the hour will come at last when the millions who curse us today will stand by us, and with us will hail the new, hard-won and painfully acquired German nation that we have created together, the new German Reich of greatness and power and glory and justice. Amen. Adolf Hitler, Reich Chancellor.
The Reichstag elections of March the 5th are the last more or less free elections in the German Reich. On the streets, dissidents are terrorized by the SA.
The terror that was felt everywhere interfered, of course, with free elections, but it influenced the results only slightly. Mannes Sperber.
In the elections, the NSDAP profits from the high turnout of 88.8%, gaining 43.9%. It has to form a coalition with the German National People's Party. But the majority of Germans don't want a parliamentary democracy either. The democratic parties remain clearly in the minority, because 12.3% of the voters cast their votes for the communists.
March the 12th, 1933. Press dispatch. The office of the Reichstag sent the newly elected members an invitation to the opening session. According to a directive, the communist members of the assembly were not sent an invitation. Vossische Zeitung newspaper.
Der Reichsregierung gab es daher nicht, durch dieses Ermächtigungsgesetz die Länder aufzuheben.
2 days later, I was sitting in the Kroll Opera House, not as a Reichstag deputy. I was an observer, and on March the 23rd, 1933, I witnessed the Reichstag session in which the Enabling Act was passed by 441 votes to 94. Arthur Axmann, member of the leadership of the Hitler Youth.
und der sich mit ihm verbrüdernden anderen Organisationen ändert dies nichts.
With the so-called Enabling Act, Hitler demands extraordinary powers for himself and his government, thus paving the way for a dictatorship.
The Social Democrats were the only members to vote against the Enabling Act.
Irgendein Grundsatz unserer Partei daran hindern können. Wehrlos ist aber nicht ehrlos.
But despite my conviction that the Social Democrats had failed,
Besiegte Gegner zu behandeln, als seien sie
I was not unimpressed by Weld's speech.
Freiheit
Arthur Axmann.
und Leben kann man uns nehmen, die Ehre nicht.
Article 1 of the Act describes the transfer of legislative powers from Parliament to the Cabinet. The legislative and executive branches become one. Parliament has virtually abolished itself.
Meine Herren, seit dem 30. Januar hat sich in Deutschland eine Umwälzung vollzogen, die in unserer Geschichte einst mit Recht als die nationale Revolution bezeichnet werden wird. Dass ein solcher geschichtlicher Vorgang wie jede Kampfhandlung hier und da auch von bedauerlichen Erscheinungen begleitet ist, liegt auf der Hand.
He overrode the Constitution with the Constitution, and thus won the fight for unlimited power in the first and decisive round. Lutz Graf Schwerin von Krosigk, Finance Minister.
Anyone who did not fight against the Hitler state effectively served it. Esther, Countess of Schwerin, East Prussian landowner.
I, as a natural coward and endowed with an excruciating imagination, kept my mouth shut. Marie-Louise Kaschnitz, writer, notes.
People cling to life. You could certainly go along with it, but you could also keep a low profile and become invisible. Alda Schäfer, writer.
Letter from prison, June the 7th, 1933. You know that imprisonment doesn't depress me at all. What could I really do outside at the moment? Shrug off the sad looks of the workers with a humiliated heart and sagging shoulders, and tell them that I cannot change it either? It's better to be outwardly unfree, and inwardly face the future with a proud soul. Julius Leber, SPD member of the Reichstag.
The first improvised concentration camps are run by the SA and are then taken over by Himmler's SS, thus creating the SS state. At the Nuremberg Victory Rally in early September 1933, SA Chief of Staff Ernst Röhm is the most prominent party leader after Hitler and clearly his right-hand man. Röhm shows his loyalty to Hitler in public. Privately, however, he criticizes Hitler severely for his policy on the German army. Thanks to his instinct for power, Hitler is willing to believe the rumors, spread by opponents of the powerful head of the SA, that the leaders of the SA, with its 4 million members, are planning a coup.
Diary, Berlin, June the 24th, 1934. Politically, it stinks. Nobody knows why exactly. A power struggle is impending between the SA and the SS. Erich Ebermeier, writer.
The differences of opinion between Röhm and Hitler, especially concerning the issue of the German army, escalate. Before the SA leadership, Röhm finally calls for the German army to be included in his command.
Diary. Sunday, July the 1st, 1934. Mutiny of the SA leaders in Munich, with Röhm at its head. Hitler himself helped arrest the gang and had them shot. Henrietta Schneider.
On July the 2nd, Hitler announces the official end of the Purge, in which between 150 and 200 people were shot.
Röhm was one of the last victims. He was shot on July the 2nd, 1934. Hans Frank, Bavarian Minister of Justice, Reich Legal Director.
To crush the alleged revolt by Röhm, Adolf Hitler uses the services of the SS, whose leaders have already brought the police almost entirely under their command. The SS, which was formerly still affiliated with the SA, is rewarded for its murderous service. On July the 20th, 1934, Hitler decrees,
"In view of the great services of the SS, particularly in connection with the occurrences of June the 30th, 1934, I hereby promote them to a self-contained organization within the NSDAP." Adolf Hitler.
With that, Hitler has forged the decisive weapon of his state. The SA becomes a kind of folklore club for the NSDAP.
Hitler swore that only 77 people had been executed. It had been unavoidable that some were shot by accident. Like a certain Willi Schmidt in Munich, for example. The SS were in a hurry to shoot the first Willi Schmidt they could find, without court proceedings. You have to consider how many Willi Schmidts there were in Munich. Fridolin Wagner, granddaughter of Richard Wagner.
Diary, Berlin, August the 1st, 1934. At lunchtime, we drove to the Halensee baths. People are friendly and peaceful. Even the young people seem well behaved here. The Berliner Zeitung newspaper published a bulletin at 8:30 this morning. Condition deteriorating, pulse weaker. So the end is near. This death does not come at a good time. Erich Ebermeier.
The newspaper reports the following about the death of Hindenburg. The government has enacted the following law that is hereby announced. The office will be merged with that of the Chancellor, which means all authority of the President goes to the Führer and Chancellor Adolf Hitler. Karl Windschild, retired pastor. Ballenstedt, diary.
Diary, Wednesday, October the 17th, 1934. A law has been made. Hitler will remain the leader of the German people for life. Henrietta Schneider.
The magic formula, the Führer has ordered. The Führer wishes. The Führer accepts. The Führer forbids, or the Führer authorizes, became the completely new, legitimized method of authority to issue directives that nullified all existing forms of state life in Germany. Hans Frank.
Arrived in Munich around 8.
and went to the Hofbräuhaus, which was very interesting. Hitler seemed so popular here, as Mussolini was in Italy. John F. Kennedy, student, traveling in Europe, diary.
At first, what surprised me was that most Germans, as far as I could see, didn't seem to mind that their personal freedoms had been taken away, that so much of their splendid culture was being destroyed, or soon became aware, to be sure, that in the background there lurked the terror of the Gestapo and the fear of the concentration camps. The vast majority did not seem unduly concerned with what had happened to a few communist, socialist, pacifists, defiant priests and pastors, and to the Jews. William Shirer, correspondent to the Universal News Service in Berlin.
Departure for Cologne via Frankfurt. All towns are very attractive, showing that the Nordic races certainly seem superior to Latins. The Germans really are too good. John F. Kennedy, diary.
I had to think a lot about the comments of an ordinary middle-aged Berlin woman. She said she went to all the ceremonies and stood near the front rows where the Führer walked by, but she was never able to see him because whenever he came near, her eyes filled with tears. Erich Kort, Department Head, Foreign Ministry.
Hitler seemed modest, middle class, rather dull and self-conscious, yet with this strange tenderness and appealing helplessness. Martha Dodd, daughter of U.S. Ambassador William Dodd.
In private, and we as personal bodyguards belonged to his private life, he was uncomplicated. Rohushmish, SS Bodyguard Regiment.
Simple lower middle class life was not hard for him. It attracted a lot of empathy. It gave him a lot of credit for other unpopular decisions. Otherwise, his simple manner also had clear political intentions. He often emphasized,
if I'm simple and unpretentious, then my surroundings have to be pompous. That way, my simplicity appears even stronger.
Albert Speer, the Landsberg Protocol.
Goering, who'd become fat and out of shape, seemed ridiculous in his fantasy uniforms and his love of medals and decorations. His greed for earthly goods turned him into a crook. Robert Coulondre, who served as an ambassador to Berlin in autumn 1938, wrote that of all Hitler's sinister buddies, he was still the best. Paul Stelin, Air Force attaché in the French embassy in Berlin.
It has been suggested many times that Hitler had unwavering faith in his old comrades. As far as the Reichsmarschall was concerned, this assumption is true, unfortunately. Heinz Guderian, commander of the 2nd Tank Division.
For the rest of the evening, he told jokes about Goebbels and Goering.
Do you know the difference between Goebbels and Goering?
He asked, and when nobody could answer, he solved the riddle himself.
Goebbels is the maximum amount of nonsense a man can utter in 1 hour, and Goering is the maximum amount of sheet metal a man can hang on his chest.
Friedelind Wagner.
Berlin, November 1937. In November, the hunting exhibition was opened by Reich Master Hunter Goering. Strong foreign participation contributed to its success, causing a sensation in Berlin and impressing the visiting guests from all over the world. Our French countrymen came in droves. Paul Stalin.
He condemned the elegant passions of his lofty colleagues, like hunting or horse racing. These were the last remnants of the feudal rule of the princes. He made fun of them a lot. Albert Speer.
Hitler's evil spirit was Goebbels. Ernst Hanfstengel.
On the same evening, I saw Goebbels for the first time. A small man with an overly big head on a child's body. He was surprisingly ugly. His defect, he has a club foot, barely lessened the antipathy that he aroused. He was, however, very intelligent, and after Hitler, the best public speaker in the party. Paul Stalin.
I couldn't care less what people think, and I'll say this openly. Goebbels was an interesting man. I never disliked him. He was only dangerous towards the end. Sarah Leander, Swedish singer and actress.
He was capable of recognizing the faults and weaknesses of the National Socialist system. But he wasn't courageous enough to point these out to Hitler. In front of Hitler, he was like Göring and Himmler, a little man. Heinz Guderian, Major General.
Speech in Munich, March the 14th, 1936. With the confidence of a sleepwalker, I am following the path marked out by destiny for me. Adolf Hitler.
Diary, Sunday, March the 16th, 1935. In the evening, we heard a proclamation to the German people by Dr. Goebbels. In answer to the adoption of 2-year military service in France, Hitler has introduced compulsory military service in Germany. Jubilation in Berlin. Henrietta Schneider.
Interview with Ward Price, correspondent for the Daily Mail, January the 17th, 1935. I know the horrors of war. No gains can compensate for the losses it brings. I have seen that war is not the highest form of bliss, but the contrary. I have witnessed only the deepest suffering. Hence, I can quite frankly state, Germany will never break the peace of its own accord. Adolf Hitler.
I saw a sign on the shop door. Dogs and Jews not allowed. Edgar Furchtwanger.
Diary, Sunday, September the 15th, 1935. On the radio tonight, they're announcing the outcome of today's resolutions in the Reichstag, that is to say, the laws that the NSDAP deputies have agreed on, the anti-Jewish laws. Marriage between Aryans and non-Aryans is forbidden. Karl Windschild, retired.
Ich schlage nun dem Reichstag die Annahme der Gesetze vor, die Ihnen Parteigenosse Reichstagspräsident Göring verlesen wird. Hinter allen 3 Gesetzen steht die Partei und mit ihr und hinter ihr die deutsche Nation. Eheschließungen zwischen Juden und Staatsangehörigen deutschen oder artverwandten Blutes sind verboten. Unser Führer, im Retter und Schöpfer, Sieg Heil!
Diary, Berlin, December the 10th, 1935. The Genetic Health Act, or sterilization law, has been passed and envisages extensive examinations and tests for engaged couples before they get married. If things continue like this, we'll soon have a race of supermen. So far, there is no sign of this happening. Erich Ebermeier.
Before the end of Culture Week, I was once again in an aeroplane. And even from the air, I could see the mass of people inside the party buildings on Zeppelinfeld. On the way back from the airport, the boiling heat of this uniformed public festival suddenly enveloped me. Marching music, columns of men, swirling dust, swastika flags in all possible and impossible places, and the pavements brown with people. Paul Otto Schmidt, Chief Interpreter at the Foreign Ministry, experiences.
The march past took 4 hours. He held his right arm out in the Nazi salute for literally the entire time. Afterwards, I asked him how he was able to do that. His answer? Willpower. Neville Henderson, British Ambassador to Germany.
Each time I noticed how enchanted people looked, their faces full of near-biblical devotion when they saw Hitler. As if delirious, they stretched out their arms and greeted him with screams and shouts of Heil. Paul Otto Schmidt.
Over the years, the procedures at the Nuremberg rallies are canonized. The form, as Hitler expresses to Albert Speer in a debriefing of the party convention in 1938, must be an irreversible ritual for as long as he lives. Canonization would provide his potential successor with Hitler's borrowed charisma and become a liturgy of the Third Reich.
On Friday, the 11th of March, 1938, Austrian radio broadcast a program of light music. It was 7:45 in the evening when the announcer suddenly interrupted. The Chancellor was going to speak. Kurt Schuschnigg said that in order to avoid bloodshed, he would capitulate to Hitler's wishes. He ended his speech with the words, "God protect Austria." Dr. Edward Bloch, the Hitler's family doctor, written in US exile, March the 15th, 1941.
Apart from his resolve to bring all Teutonic races into the Reich, as so plainly described in Mein Kampf, Hitler had 2 reasons for wishing to absorb the Austrian Republic. It opened both the door of Czechoslovakia and the more spacious portals of southeastern Europe to Germany. Winston Churchill, the Second World War.
If it is still claimed today that Hitler occupied Austria against the will of the Austrians, that doesn't coincide with my observations. Fritz Wiedemann, Adjutant to Adolf Hitler.
Hitler's speech from a balcony of the Habsburg Palace. As Führer and Chancellor of the German nation and Reich, I report before history the entry of my homeland into the German Reich.
On March the 25th, 1938, Hitler begins the last election campaign of his life. Hitler wants to confirm the annexation of Austria in a referendum. He estimates 80% will vote in favor of it in Austria. He's more than surprised when on the evening of April the 10th, the referendum results are announced. 99.75% have voted for the Anschluss, more than in the Old Reich.
He's really very lonely. Doesn't have any luck with women. He's too soft with them. Women don't like that. They need a man to lord it over them. Joseph Goebbels, Diary.
In October 1938, Willy Faust shoots Bellamy in the IFA studios in Berlin.
Speech to the Nazi Women's League in Nuremberg. There was a time when liberalism fought for the equal rights of women, but the faces of German women, of German girls, lacked hope. They were gloomy and sad. And today we see countless beaming, laughing faces. Adolf Hitler.
He knew that he could have any number of women. He refused because he didn't know, as he said jokingly, whether they favored him as a Reich Chancellor or as Adolf Hitler. Albert Speer.
As for Eva Braun, no one outside the inner circles of the party and the SS knew of her until the last year of the war. Charles Bewley, Irish Envoy Extraordinary to Berlin, 1933 to 1939.
Privately, Hitler was very nice. Eva Braun loved him very much, and he loved her. Hertha Schneider, friend of Eva Braun.
Diary, November the 18th, 1934. I don't want it to be my fault if he doesn't like me anymore. Eva Braun.
For several months in the years 1934 and 1935, Eva Braun keeps a diary. The diary includes the period when she attempts suicide, probably to get Hitler to commit to her.
Diary, March the 11th, 1935. If only I'd never met him. I'm in despair. I'm buying sleeping powders again. He only needs me for certain purposes, nothing else is possible. When he says he loves me, he means it only at that moment. Eva Braun.
That was when Eva Braun attempted her first suicide. This act of desperation moved Hitler deeply. Christa Schröder, Hitler's private secretary. Politically, she had no idea. You often heard Eva Braun complaining,
I don't know anything. Everything's kept secret from me.
Hitler had got used to his girlfriend's character, but he didn't give in to everything she wanted. She was subject to a lot of strict rules. When she danced, she did so secretly because Hitler disliked dancing. Christa Schröder.
The efforts my wife and I made to encourage Hitler to take private dancing lessons weren't crowned with success.
No,
he said categorically.
For a statesman, dancing is an undignified activity. All of these balls are purely a waste of time. And besides, the waltz is far too effeminate for a man. It's exactly this waltz mania that made me hate Vienna so much, and how it contributed to the downfall of the Habsburg Empire.
Ernst Hanfstaengl, from 1937 in exile.
Hitler maintains his publicly Spartan lifestyle in surroundings of not inconsiderable luxury. In addition to his private apartment in Munich, he also has a residence in the Alps on Obersalzberg. Unnoticed by the public, he builds up a fortune worth millions.
I don't have any stocks. I don't own shares in any company. I don't earn dividends. Adolf Hitler in the Krupp Works, Essen, March the 27th, 1936.
The Reich Finance Ministry declares that Hitler is no longer obliged to pay taxes due to his constitutional position. And as of 1934, Hitler no longer does so.
When he had to make big decisions, he went up to Obersalzberg. Here, life was geared to his personal needs. Strolls around Obersalzberg, stopping in small guest houses, gave him, as he said, the inner peace and confidence to make the decisions that surprised the world. Albert Speer.
He didn't drink a drop of alcohol, never ate meat, didn't smoke. His asceticism was real and not artificial. Hans Frank.
One of those present asked his personal physician whether the health of the Reich Chancellor forced him to keep such a strict diet. And he answered that his Spartan habits were mainly for psychological reasons. Gustav Mannerheim, Finnish Field Marshal.
Incidentally, the Führer tried to spoil the meat-eaters' enjoyment of their meal. Although he didn't want to convert anyone to vegetarianism, he suddenly began talking about how awful it was walking through an abattoir. Gertraud Traudl-Junge, Hitler's private secretary.
Enjoying meat, he said, triggered a desire for alcohol. And then again, alcohol stimulated smoking. And this was how one vice led to another. Nicotine was, in his opinion, even worse than alcohol. He actually toyed with the idea of totally banning smoking throughout Germany. The campaign would start with a skull and crossbones printed on the cigarette packet. Christa Schröder.
Hitler is driven by the notion that he will only be granted a short life.
My personal last will and testament, Berlin, May the 2nd, 1938. In the case of my death, I dispose that my remains be buried in the right-hand temple of the Eternal Guardhouse. My coffin should resemble the others, that my entire estate be left to the party. To Fräulein Eva Braun, Munich, a lifelong allowance of 1,000 marks per month. To my sister Angela, Dresden, a lifelong allowance of 1,000 marks per month. To my sister Paula, Vienna, a lifelong allowance of 1,000 marks per month. To my stepbrother Alois Hitler, the lump sum of 60,000 marks. To my trusted Julius Schaup, the lump sum of 10,000 marks and a lifelong monthly pension of 500 marks. I appoint the Master of the Treasury as executor of this testament. In the case of his death, Martin Bormann. Adolf Hitler.
Adolf Hitler neither finished school nor had any vocational training. He occasionally lived in homeless shelters or on the street. He refused to pursue a regular job. To this day, it seems inexplicable that he could come to power. Out of nowhere, Hitler became the Führer, leader of the German Reich, one of the most powerful men of the 20th century who brought the world to the brink of disaster and death to millions of people. The nation worshipped him and followed him blindly into the abyss. But during his lifetime, he kept his origins and his life secret. No one should know how or who he was. Hitler's contemporaries, from his birth to his death, flesh out the picture. Who was Hitler?
He has managed to captivate his people using a mystical band that is not even dependent on the National Socialist Party that helped him into power. I often have the opportunity to experience this, indeed in all social circles. Robert Coulondre, French ambassador to Berlin, 1938 and 1939.
Trappau lies near the German border. Whenever we came up to the border, several in the group broke away, ran across the borderline, and kissed the German earth. Later, I learned that these children were ethnic Germans who were raised to love Germany. Ruth Elias, Czech Jew.
Diary, Monday, September the 12th, 1938. In the evening, we heard the close of the party convention in Nuremberg. Adolf Hitler called on President Benesch. If the Sudeten Germans are not protected, we know what we have to do. God preserve the existing peace. Diary, Tuesday, September the 27th, 1938. Hitler spoke to the German people last night. If Benesch doesn't accept his offer, we'll move in on October the 1st. That means war. Diary, Wednesday, September the 28th, 1938. Tomorrow, a meeting in Munich between Hitler, Daladier, Chamberlain, and Mussolini. Henriette Schneider, housekeeper, East Prussia.
In spite of the harshness and ruthlessness I thought I saw in his face, I got the impression that here was a man who could be relied upon when he had given his word. Neville Chamberlain, British Prime Minister, letter to his sister.
Diary, Friday, September the 30th, 1938. The negotiations in Munich have had a happy ending. The Czechs have to pull out of the Sudetenland tomorrow. Hitler, our Prince of Peace. Henriette Schneider.
The genius of the Führer and his determination not to shrink, even in the face of war, have again achieved victory without the use of force. Alfred Jodl, Major General.
In Munich, the failed Putsch of 1923 was celebrated with great pomp. The SS marched through all over the city. The radio announced the death of the diplomat. Edgar Furchtwanger.
Die Feierlichkeiten am 9. November in München fanden ihren Abschluss mit der Vereidigung der SS-Anwärter auf dem Platz vor der Feldherrnhalle in Anwesenheit des Führers.
On Monday, November the 7th, 1938, the stateless 17-year-old Jewish boy Grünspan goes to the German embassy, demands to speak with one of the counselors, is taken to the duty counselor vom Rat, and shoots him. Grünspan describes the motive for the act as wanting to take revenge for his fellow believers, for the Polish Jews forced out of Germany. Walter Tausk, German Jew, Wroclaw, diary.
Following a traditional march to the Feldherrnhalle, at a social evening of NS party leaders and old comrades, Joseph Goebbels announces the death of Ernst vom Rath.
I go to the party reception in the old town hall. Very busy. I report the matter to the Führer. He orders,
"Withdraw the police. The Jews should for once feel the people's anger."
Joseph Goebbels, diary.
Diary, November 1938. In the night that brings the news of the death, a pogrom breaks out all over Germany. All the synagogues are on fire, windows are smashed in all the Jewish shops, the wares destroyed. Apartments are broken into. Thousands of Jewish men are arrested and locked up in concentration camps. Käthe Kollwitz, painter and sculptress.
When that segment of the population that had not taken part either as police or SA awoke after the fatal night and saw the destruction that had taken place, a sequence unfolded that its instigators had not expected. An unmistakable, deep sense of depression and shame seized the public. People said, "I'm ashamed to be a German." Rudolf Bing, German Jewish businessman, Nuremberg.
Diary, December the 6th, 1938. A boycott has been issued against Jews throughout the Reich. The ban against Jews in Berlin applies to all theatres, cinemas, cabarets, concert and lecture halls, museums, fairs, the radio tower, the Deutschlandhalle and the Sportpalast. In addition, all outdoor and indoor swimming pools, as well as from Wilhelmstraße and Vossstraße to the Reich Monument and the Zeughaus. Erich Ebermeier, writer.
Harassed by the Nazi authorities, around 120,000 German and Austrian Jews succeed in leaving their homeland by the beginning of the Second World War.
Diary, January the 1st, 1939. A new year. Ah, may it be a year of peace. Thea Sternheim, art collector and author.
On the 13th of February 1939, Hitler tells a few confidants that he intends to take action against the Czechs in mid-March. German propaganda is adjusted accordingly.
Diary. Berlin, March the 14th, 1939. Nighttime. Foreign broadcasters are reporting that the Czechoslovak President Hacha arrived in Berlin today and was received by Hitler. Does this mean war, after all? Erich Ebermeier.
In the meantime, I dealt with the transcription of the statement of just a few lines, reading, "The Czechoslovak president has declared that he has trustingly placed the fate of the Czech people and country in the hands of the Führer of the German Reich." The Führer accepted this declaration and expressed his intention of taking the Czech people under the protection of the German Reich and guaranteeing them autonomous development of their ethnic life suited to their character. Paul Otto Schmidt, interpreter for Adolf Hitler.
For 3 hours, Hitler conducted a discussion with the president of Czechoslovakia. We all knew that it was about war or peace. Suddenly the door opened. Hitler rushed out and proclaimed,
"So, people, good news. Hacha has signed the agreement. I will go down as the greatest German in history."
Christa Schröder, Hitler's private secretary.
Letter to Elizabeth Wagner, March the 15th, 1939, evening. The Führer drove to Prague at 4 o'clock this afternoon. He is staying in Prague Castle. In the morning, there will be a parade. His dream is thus fulfilled. Eduard Wagner, Artillery General.
Secret report to Ambassador Josef Lipski in Berlin. Everyone is awaiting further steps from Hitler. It is generally assumed that after the annexation of Memel, he has to move on to the settlement demands with Poland, primarily the takeover of Danzig and the corridor. The solution to these questions will meet with understanding and recognition by the German people. Felix Tyszewski, Polish General Consul.
Letter to his wife, Vita Sackville-West, April the 20th, 1939. There is a break in the crisis, which makes me uneasy. That is one of the worst things with this tension. If Hitler doesn't do anything, we all become uneasy. And if he does do something, we all get frightened. Harold Nicholson, Member of Parliament, National Labour Party.
The summer was winding down. The weather was warm and sultry, and Danzig's numerous cafes, beer and wine gardens were filled with Germans enjoying themselves, despite all the talk of imminent war. It was difficult to conceive of such folks going to war or causing war to break out over them. William Shirer, correspondent for the Columbia Broadcast System in Berlin.
August the 13th, 1939. Obersalzberg. Paul Otto Schmidt, interpreter of Adolf Hitler. Hitler was completely set on war.
The British are guilty of everything. The Poles have a serious lesson to learn. The democracies are inferior to Germany and will never fight.
Was the recurring keynote of the German dictator's speeches. The next day, the Italian Foreign Minister Ciano was received at the Burghof. Hitler spoke the following sentence at this event.
I am firmly convinced that neither England nor France will enter into a general war.
On August the 19th, Käthe and Erich Höse from Leipzig begin their honeymoon with a canoe trip on the Oder River in Upper Silesian Ratibor. They take Erich's camera. For 12 days, the newlywed Leipzigers paddle down the Oder. During this time, Adolf Hitler propels the continent into a world war.
Diary, Paris, August the 19th, 1939. Announcement of a German-Russian non-aggression pact. Thea Sternheim.
At the end of July, on Hitler's approval, Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop and State Secretary von Weizsäcker set the foundations for an agreement with the Soviet Union, which also includes the partitioning of Poland and the Baltic states. Hitler is in a hurry because he believes autumn rains will prevent a motorized war in backward Poland.
On August the 19th, Stalin accepted Hitler's offer with both hands after Hitler had suggested splitting the Baltic into spheres of influence. I noted, but if Ribbentrop travels to Moscow, it means Russia is inviting Hitler to invade Poland. Ernst von Weizsäcker, Secretary of State at the Foreign Office, Memoirs.
Telegram to the German Chancellor, Herr A. Hitler, August the 21st, 1939. I thank you for your letter. I hope that the German-Soviet non-aggression pact will be a turning point and a serious improvement in political relations between our countries. J. Stalin.
Addressed to the Commanders-in-Chief of the military, August the 22nd, 1939. It was becoming clear to me that a dispute with Poland might take place at an unfavourable time. Here is the basis for this finding. It depends essentially on me, on my existence, on my political ability. For it is a fact that probably no one will ever have the trust of the entire German people as I do. In the future, there will probably never be a man who has more authority than I. My presence, therefore, is of great value, but I can be eliminated at any time by a criminal or by an idiot. Adolf Hitler.
Suffocatingly humid days full of fear and expectations. Very calm, now only a few cars, but trains, almost without a break, whistling shrilly. You can't do anything, can't think, can't feel anything other than no war. Marie-Louise Kaschnitz, author, notes.
On August the 30th, Käthe and Erich Höse reached the delta of the Oder River and Stettin, the harbour. Government cruise liners are anchored here, placed under the protection of the Red Cross as hospital ships. 2 days after the honeymooners arrive in Stettin, the Second World War begins. Erich Höse becomes a soldier on September the 1st.
Diary, Wednesday, August the 30th, 1939. In the afternoon, troops equipped for war passed for hours, heading for the border. Poland has declared mobilization. Henrietta Schneider, East Prussia.
Private War Diary, General Franz Halder. Demands of the Führer on the military leadership. Destruction of Poland equals elimination of its living power. It is not about achieving a specific line or a new border, but about destroying the enemy. The means are of little concern.
It is disturbing to see the amount of responsibility that he bears and accepts. Eduard Wagner.
Message from Commander of Westerplatte Peninsula to Polish Navy Headquarters in Gdynia, September the 1st, 1939, 0450. At 0445, the armored cruiser Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Westerplatte with all its guns. The barrage continues. Henryk Zukarski, Major of the Polish Army.
Morning, 10 a.m., Reichstag session. Hitler appears, deadly serious. For the first time in field grey uniform. Members of parliament rise silently. Then Hitler speaks without notes, describing the events of the last days. Then comes a sentence.
Since 5:45 a.m., we have been returning fire.
Rudolf Jordan, provincial NSDAP leader.
Address before the Reichstag, September the 1st, 1939. I have once more put on that coat that was most sacred and dear to me. I will not take it off again until victory is secured, or I will not survive the outcome.
In the early hours, 4 a.m., of September the 3rd, I was accordingly instructed by His Majesty's government to arrange for a meeting with the Minister for Foreign Affairs at 9 a.m. I accordingly handed the final ultimatum from His Majesty's government to Dr. Schmidt at precisely 9 a.m., pointing out that, unless satisfactory assurances were received by His Majesty's government before 11 a.m. British summer time of the suspension of all the German forces from Poland, a state of war would exist between our two countries, as from that hour. Neville Henderson, British Ambassador to Germany.
Paul Otto Schmidt, Chief Interpreter at the Foreign Ministry, experiences. Then I took the ultimatum to the Chancellery. Hitler's most prominent people were gathered in the room in front of his office. "What news?" asked anxious voices. I answered with a shrug. Schools cancelled, and entered the next room where Hitler was sitting at his desk, while Ribbentrop stood at the window. I remained some distance from Hitler's desk and slowly translated the ultimatum of the British government. When I finished, there was total silence. Hitler sat as though turned to stone, just looking straight ahead. After a while, he turned to Ribbentrop.
"What now?"
Ribbentrop replied with a quiet voice,
"I suppose the French will issue an identical ultimatum within the hour."
As my job was now finished, I left and told those waiting outside, in 2 hours, a state of war will exist between England and Germany. Goering turned to me and said,
"If we lose this war, then may heaven have mercy on us."
War Diary, September the 13th, 1939. The Führer's motorcade roared by. We saw our Führer. He was going to the front. Gerhard M., soldier, Flensburg.
Some 16,000 members of the German armed forces die, and 30,000 are wounded in the Polish campaign of 1939. Sources report 68,000 dead and 130,000 wounded on the Polish side. Tens of thousands of Polish civilians are killed in the course of the 5-week conflict.
Diary, September the 28th, 1939. Warsaw has finally fallen. Mountains of corpses have to be removed. The Russians are marching into Poland and are moving up to an agreed demarcation line. Scattered Polish divisions are leading a heroic, desperate struggle. Udo from Alvensleben, Captain, 16th Tank Division.
The next day in Warsaw, troops paraded in front of Hitler. The Lanchner brothers filmed him. I was standing near Hitler and saw how the troops looked at him, mesmerized. Without exception, they appeared ready to do anything for him. If he were to give the order, they would die for him. Leni Riefenstahl, director and actress.
Führer spoke at length and in detail about the ongoing incorporation of the former provinces of Posen and West Prussia. The social strata thought to be racially valuable could be Germanized. In principle, they would have to look racially pure and have the right hereditary disposition. A special cultural heritage group would be created. Here, language would be the most important factor. He said he wasn't interested in the Polish intelligentsia, as they were the supporters of Polish nationalism. Gerhard Engel, Army Adjutant to Hitler, memoirs in diary form.
At lunchtime on May the 9th, we left Berlin in great secrecy and travelled at first light towards Hamburg. Turned the train around and arrived in Aachen at 3 a.m. Under a beautiful starry sky, we went by car to the command post of the Führer's headquarters, the Felsennest or Rocky Eyrie. Wilhelm Keitel, Supreme High Commander of the Armed Forces. Memoirs. In the first Armed Forces report at noon on May the 10th, I had recorded the sentence, "The Führer has personally taken over supreme command of the German army operating in the West." I wrestled with him for half an hour over the approval of this publication. He declared he wanted to remain anonymous and not diminish the glory for the generals. I did not let up, and in the end he gave in. Wilhelm Keitel.
Hitler took the credit for the success of the Western campaign. Albert Speer, Memoirs.
Diary, Friday, May the 10th, 1940. Now the war has really begun. Chamberlain has stepped down and Churchill replaced him. One bad person has left, and a much worse one has come. Henrietta Schneider.
Thus, then, on the night of the 10th of May, at the outset of this mighty battle, I acquired the chief power in the state. I cannot conceal that I was conscious of a profound sense of relief. I felt as if I were walking with destiny, and that all my past life had been but a preparation for this hour and for this trial. Winston Churchill, The Second World War.
May the 23rd, 1940. We've done it. The Air Force is destroying the English on the beach. I was able to persuade Hitler to stop the army. The Führer wants this to be a lesson for them. Hans Jeschonek, Chief of the General Staff of the Air Force to Erhard Milch, State Secretary of the Aviation Ministry.
Diary, Friday, June the 14th, 1940. News at 1 o'clock at night. Paris occupied by our troops without a fight. Flag raised for 3 days. Henrietta Schneider.
France offered a ceasefire on June the 17th. I've never seen Hitler as happy as on that day. Heinz Linger, valet to Adolf Hitler.
France's peace offer was submitted to him while he stood surrounded by his officers. He slapped his thigh in a lively gesture. We were to one side and observed the scene that Walter Franz also filmed. Christa Schröder, he was my boss.
Heinrich Hoffmann, photographer. Keitel, who was carried away by an outburst of emotion, coined the fatal phrase,
"My Führer, you are the greatest military commander of all time."
Franz Halder, Chief of the General Staff. Part of Hitler's growing self-deification after the first military successes involved believing it himself.
Hitler was at the height of his power. He was the master of Europe. Gustav Mannerheim, Field Marshal of Finland. Germany had air supremacy over Europe. An invasion of Great Britain seemed to be in the offing. Ernst von Weizsäcker.
A stay of a few days in the English capital was all that was needed to recognize the difference between London and Paris. Here, no one was considering capitulation. Julius Deutsch, Austrian socialist of Jewish descent, in exile. Memoirs.
It was only after France had been flattened out that Britain, thanks to her island advantage, developed out of the pangs of defeat and the menace of annihilation a national resolve equal to that of Germany. Winston Churchill.
Diary, Saturday, July the 20th, 1940. Hitler spoke in the Reichstag, made an offer of peace to England. Henrietta Schneider.
Memoirs in diary form, November the 4th, 1940, Reich Chancellery. An unpleasant meeting at headquarters, attended by Göring, von Brauchitsch, Keitel. Due to English and other press reports, Führer for the first time doubts the successes of the Luftwaffe and the strike figures. Führer visibly depressed. Have the impression that he doesn't know how to proceed. Gerhard Engel.
The Führer and the Supreme Commander of the German Army, the Führer headquarters, absolutely top secret, for officers only, 9 copies, second copy, order number 21, Operation Barbarossa. Even before the end of the war against England, the German army has to be prepared to overthrow Soviet Russia in a quick campaign, Operation Barbarossa. The bulk of the Russian army in Western Russia should be destroyed in bold operations via tank pincer movements in order to prevent the withdrawal of strong combat units into the expanses of the Russian interior.
Adolf Hitler.
Memoirs in diary form, December the 18th, 1940. The order for Barbarossa has been issued. The Army Supreme Commander has ordered us to find out whether the Führer wants armed engagement or is just bluffing. In my opinion, Führer himself still doesn't know how to proceed. He hopes the English will capitulate and doesn't believe the USA will enter the war. Gerhard Engel.
Diary, Monday, June the 9th, 1941. There's a big operation here. The streets are full of military of every kind on their way to the border. Henrietta Schneider, East Prussia.
When he decided on the Eastern Campaign in the summer of 1941, he told Eva Braun he had to travel to Berlin for a few days. Christa Schröder.
When Adolf heard the music of Wagner, he was transformed. Then he lost his fierceness. He became quiet, flexible, manageable. The unease disappeared from his face. What had moved him during the day vanished. August Kubitschek, childhood friend.
Wagner's music became second nature to him. Ernst Hanfstengel, until 1937, head of the NSDAP Foreign Press Bureau.
He loved the Wagner opera the most. Other than that, symphonies by Beethoven and Bruckner, or songs by Richard Strauss. Of the light entertainment pieces, he appreciated The Bat and The Merry Widow. Bormann proved his musical knowledge just by changing the records. Heinrich Hoffmann.
It was almost always the same repertoire that Hitler had them play. The only popular song Hitler allowed was the Donkey Serenade, which often concluded the concert. Gertraud Traudl-Junge, Hitler's private secretary.
You'll be hearing that a lot in the near future. It'll be the victory fanfare for our Russian campaign. How do you like it? Adolf Hitler to Albert Speer after listening to the first bars of Les Préludes by Franz Liszt. The Russian fanfare, June the 21st, 1941.
Diary, Saturday, June the 21st, 1941. Wild rumors are coming from the border. Henrietta Schneider.
War Diary of the Army Group North, June the 22nd, 1941. Beginning of the invasion, 3:05 a.m. The entire front of the Army Group crossed the border. Robert Freiherr von Griesenbeck, Major.
Is he mad, this Hitler? He could have allied himself with England's Chamberlain against communist Russia, or with communist Russia against the Anglo-Saxon capitalist world. But he invaded both. Yes, he is mad. Thank God. Klaus Mann, A Life's Report.
Christa Schröder. It all began so promisingly. In the first 2 days in the Wolfschanze, we experienced the boss standing in front of a large map of Europe and pointing to Moscow, saying,
In a few weeks we'll be in Moscow. There's no doubt about that. And then I'll raise Moscow to the ground. I'll build a reservoir there. The name Moscow has to be erased completely.
Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the Armed Forces High Command, to Field Marshal Fedor von Bock on July the 25th, 1941. The speedy collapse of Russia is vital for German interests, since Russia cannot be subjugated. The Führer was concerned about this situation and asked, worriedly,
"How much time do I have left to finish off Russia? And how much time do I still need?"
Russia, Army Group South, letter, 1941. It is our war. Not, as the enemy propaganda likes to call it, Hitler's war. They don't know that Hitler is one of us, a soldier like us. We know that he would do everything in his power for us. That gives us unlimited trust. The Führer leaves no comrade in the lurch, and when he doesn't help, it's because there was something more important. Horst Rochel, regimental doctor from Kassel.
Diary, October the 10th, 1941, 11:30 p.m. It's snowing in Russia now, something we can't deal with well. Eduard Wagner, Quartermaster General.
There is a winter, you know, in Russia. For a good many months, the temperature is apt to fall very low. There is snow, there is frost, and all that. Hitler forgot about this Russian winter. He must have been very loosely educated. We all heard about it at school, but he forgot it. Winston Churchill.
Diary, Thursday, December the 11th, 1941. Around 3 o'clock, we listened to the Führer from the Reichstag. The war with America is also official now. The Führer will make sure everything turns out well. Henrietta Schneider.
When the German army, surprised by the terrible winter of 1941-42, got stuck in the Russian ice and snow, Hitler was frequently depressed. But as before, he hoped for a quick victory.
There is only a very thin veil that we have to penetrate. We have to be patient. The Russian resistance will not hold.
Christa Schröder.
On December the 17th, I visited the generals commanding the 14th and 47th Tank Corps, as well as the 7th Army Corps, to again learn about the condition of the troops. The three generals reported that the troops were beginning to have doubts about the high command. Black ice making all movement difficult. The Russians are prepared and equipped for winter, and we have nothing. Heinz Guderian, Colonel General.
Franz Halder, War Diary, December the 17th, 1941. Midnight, summoned to the Führer.
Disengagement is out of the question. The enemy has only made deep incursions in a few places. Setting up a rear echelon is illusory. The front is suffering in only one respect. The enemy has more soldiers. He has no more artillery. He is much worse off than we are. Adolf Hitler, Oral Order to Army Group Center, December the 16th, 1941. Commanders, unit leaders and officers are to take personal steps to force troops to engage in fanatical resistance to hold their position, without regard to enemy breakthroughs on the flank or in the rear. Only with this kind of warfare can we gain the time necessary to get reinforcements from the homeland and the West that I have ordered.
Diary, January the 11th, 1942. How meek our military communiques have become. Friedrich Kellner, court employee, Laubach, Hesse.
But the burden of work and increasing concerns from setbacks in the course of the war eroded Hitler's health. From the winter of 1941-1942 onwards, Morel monitored him day and night. In the end, Hitler began having mysterious injections almost every day. Christa Schröder.
Diary, Berlin, March the 3rd, 1942. The hallmarks of the situation: further erosion of the German forces in Russia, slow further deterioration of the economic and food situations in Germany. Ulrich von Hassel, diplomat and member of the German resistance.
From Rostov-on-Don, several waves of retreat rolled through our area in the summer of 1942. The oil tanks were opened, wheat fields torched, also that they wouldn't fall into the hands of the enemy. On August the 3rd, 1942, German scouts surfaced on motorbikes. Within 3 days, German troops moved into Privolnoye. Soviet troops were scattered. But beyond Nalchik, barrier units worked to carry out Order number 227 from Stalin. Not one step back. Mikhail Gorbachev, schoolboy.
War Diary, July the 30th, 1942, day 404. In the bow of the River Don, west of Stalingrad, the 6th Army of Army Group B is engaged in a fierce battle, and the situation is at present unclear. Franz Halder.
I wanted to come to the Volga, to a specific place and a specific city. Adolf Hitler, address at the traditional gathering in the Munich Bürgerbräu-Keller, November the 9th, 1942.
On September the 11th, I was ordered to report to the frontline staff under Khrushchev. They told me to take over the 62nd Army. My orders were, defend Stalingrad. After I accepted the order, Nikita Khrushchev asked me, "How do you see this?" I said, "I understand the order very well. I'll try to carry it out. Either I defend Stalingrad or I die doing so." I got in the car and drove to Stalingrad. Vasily Chuikov, Lieutenant General, the Stalingrad Protocols.
The high point of the war had been reached. Something unimaginable overpowered the wildest dreams. The North Cape, Pyrenees, Sahara and Volga formed the boundaries of a sphere of influence created overnight. For sure, there were bigger empires, but this one included Europe and its nations. There was no reason for joy. You knew what lay ahead for us because the disproportion of forces was obvious. Udo from Alvensleben, Army Captain, Diary.
We knew that Hitler wouldn't stop and would keep throwing military forces at the front. But he sensed that it was not a battle for life being fought here, but rather a battle to the death. Vasily Chuikov.
I feel entitled to demand that every German soldier should sacrifice his life. Adolf Hitler to Heinz Guderian on December the 20th, 1940, 3:30 p.m.
Diary, Sunday, November the 8th, 1942. The Führer spoke from the Munich Hofbräukeller. He laid into the war criminals again. The Americans landed in Algiers during the night. Henrietta Schneider.
Dr. Theo Morel, Adolf Hitler's personal physician. Diary, December the 15th, 1942. Patient A, sleeping badly because of the military situation. Profundo.
Up until the very end, the soldiers believed Hitler's promise that he would get them out of the encirclement. I knew that this was a terrible lie. Bernd Freitag von Loinghofen, Major, flown out of the Stalingrad siege.
Interrogation protocol of prisoner Hermann Strothmann, Lieutenant Adjutant of the 1st Battalion of the 79th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, born 1918 in Münster, Catholic. Men reached the limits of their endurance, and this limit was reached on February the 2nd. We surrendered spontaneously. Around 6 o'clock in the morning, I was told that Russian tanks had arrived. I began to cry, walked out of the shelter, and laid down my weapon.
At what point is one allowed to view the war as lost? As I see it, very late. Albert Speer, the Landsberg Protocols.
Adolf Hitler neither finished school nor had any vocational training. He occasionally lived in homeless shelters or on the street. He refused to pursue a regular job. To this day, it seems inexplicable that he could come to power. Out of nowhere, Hitler became the Führer, leader of the German Reich, one of the most powerful men of the 20th century, who brought the world to the brink of disaster and death to millions of people. The nation worshipped him and followed him blindly into the abyss. But during his lifetime, he kept his origins and his life secret. No one should know how or who he was. Hitler's contemporaries, from his birth to his death, flesh out the picture. Who was Hitler?
His mother went to Mass with little Paula every Sunday. I can't recall that Adolf accompanied his mother to church once. August Kubitschek, childhood friend of Adolf Hitler in Linz.
Hitler had no emotional connection to the church. He thought the Christian religion was an outdated, hypocritical, people-ensnaring institution. Christa Schröder, Hitler's private secretary.
If the people think I'm a religious man, well, that cannot hurt. Adolf Hitler to photographer Heinrich Hoffmann.
I can say with certainty that even before my departure, I learned about Hitler's intention to liquidate patients with incurable diseases, not only incurable mental patients in the event of war. His reasoning was that these would be unnecessary mouths to feed. Fritz Wiedemann, personal adjutant of the NSDAP to Adolf Hitler until January the 19th, 1939.
Memoirs in diary form, August the 8th, 1939. Today we witnessed something cruel. Führer and Bormann showed Hitler the euthanasia film Unworthy Life. It deals with the life and behavior of incurable mental patients in a number of sanatoriums. There was a long discussion afterwards. The Führer had a really harsh attitude. If he had such a child, he would request that it be put out of its misery, not least for the sake of fellow humans. Gerhard Engel, Army Adjutant to Hitler.
For many of Adolf Hitler's crimes, no documents exist that verify his direct and immediate responsibility. It is different with the centrally organized killing of the mentally handicapped, referred to as euthanasia. Sometime in early October 1939, Adolf Hitler signs a backdated order for September the 1st, the day of the start of the war. With his signature, he authorizes Philipp Buhler, the chief of the Führer's chancellery, and Hitler's young personal physician, Karl Brandt.
Reich leader Buhler and Dr. Brandt are entrusted with the responsibility of extending the authority of physicians so that patients who, on the basis of human judgment, are considered incurable can be accorded mercy killing after a definitive diagnosis.
Adolf Hitler.
One day, we were surprised by a report that a euthanasia operation was underway in Swabia. Family members received the ashes with the official notice that the beloved deceased had unfortunately died quite suddenly of pneumonia or from an infectious disease. Through faulty communication of such condolences and sometimes double deliveries of urns, unrest was created among the population and the clergy. Reinhard Spitzi, Austrian member of the SS and NSDAP.
The Bishop of Münster, Clemens August Graf von Galen, finds the courage to deliver a frank opinion in public.
Sermon in St. Lambert's Church, Münster, August the 3rd, 1941. So now we must expect that poor, defenseless, sick people will be killed sooner or later. Do you, or do I, only have the right to live as long as we are recognized as productive by others? If it is legitimate to kill unproductive members of the community, then woe betide our brave soldiers who return home from war with serious battle wounds as invalids. If the principle that man is entitled to kill his unproductive fellow man is established and applied, then woe betide all of us when we become aged and thus unproductive. Clemens August Graf von Galen, Bishop of Münster.
Von Galen's brave protest is based on concrete critical points and is successful. The conflict between the Hitler regime, the Bishop of Münster, and other public critics is settled only partially. Hitler suspends the largest part of the euthanasia program for more than a year, after more than 70,000 people had been killed. In less conspicuous forms, the euthanasia program was reintroduced to sanatoriums and nursing homes and practiced right up to the end of the war.
The Führer called me into the Reich Chancellery at 4 p.m. today. To start with, he spent a whole hour describing the campaign in Poland. The Poles, only a thin Germanic layer. Underneath that, dreadful stock. The Jews, the worst that you could possibly imagine. Only a master's heavy hand could rule here. Alfred Rosenberg, Director of the Foreign Policy Office of the NSDAP.
Two days later, I went to the Warsaw Ghetto. A brick wall about 8 feet high had been built around the entire desolate area, from which all the Aryans had been evacuated and into which more than 400,000 Jews had been forced. The entire population of the ghetto seemed to be living in the street. There was hardly a square yard of empty space. As we picked our way across the mud and rubble, the shadows of what have once been men or women flitted by us in pursuit of someone or something, their eyes blazing with some insane hunger or greed. Frequently, we pass by corpses lying naked in the streets. Jan Karski, courier of the Polish underground.
For a long time, researchers and prosecutors searched for a definitive written order from Hitler for the murder of European Jews. Such an order from Hitler on the final solution of the Jewish question obviously doesn't exist.
Service calendar Heinrich Himmler. Himmler's lecture notes. Führer headquarters, Führer, Wolfschanze, July the 18th, 1941, 4 p.m. Jewish question, exterminators partisans. Restructuring of the Waffen-SS.
In any case, I'm totally convinced, even without written proof, that the extermination of the Jews goes back to a specific order from Hitler, because it's unthinkable that Himmler and Göring would have carried this out without his knowledge. Nikolaus von Below, Luftwaffe Adjutant to Adolf Hitler.
Immediately after the invasion of the Soviet Union by the Wehrmacht, the 3,000-man death squads of security police and the Reich Security Service begin their killing operations. The political responsibility lies with Hermann Göring, to whom Hitler has transferred the coordination of Jewish policy.
If I am asked whether I knew about the shooting of the Jews, I have to say that I received an order to attend the shooting of Jews as a spectator. I remember that we had to be at the shooting site at 8 p.m. A Navy Captain Lipaia.
Around noon, an old man from Lower Saxony, Colonel Scheer, visited me. Among the things he talked about that were especially horrible was the shooting of Jews. He'd been told by another colonel, Tippelskirch, I believe. Ernst Junge, Captain, Paris, Diary.
I saw a long, deep ditch. SS men and Latvian police, in plain clothes wearing armbands, were standing beside it. The terrain was overgrown with bushes, and the ground was sandy. We watched about 1.5 hours of the execution. During this time, 3 to 4 trucks were brought in from the city to the shooting site. Then the victims were driven like cattle from the truck to the ditch. Each time, 5 had to march in single file into the ditch. The shooting took place under the command of the SS. The victims stood facing us. I can remember exactly that after the salvos, the victims collapsed. A Navy Captain Lipaia.
Letter to the SS and Latvian Police Chief, Commander of the Riga Police Force, January the 3rd, 1942. The execution of the Jews carried out in the time frame of the report is still the talk of the local population. The fate of the Jews is deplored numerous times, and at the moment, you hear few people in favor of their elimination. Among other things, there is a rumor circulating that the execution was filmed. SS and Police Chief Lipaia.
Memoirs in diary form. A grim, gloomy mood. Führer had a long discussion with Himmler, and afterwards there was the usual corresponding atmosphere. Gerhard Engel.
Hitler never told me anything about the treatment of the Jews. In foreign policy, the subject only arose when the Jews were to be deported from some country or other. Franz von Sonnleitner, NSDAP member, after 1939 legation counselor in the Foreign Ministry.
Adolf Hitler addressed to the traditional gathering in the Munich Bürgerbräukeller, November the 8th, 1942. You will recall the Reichstag session at which I declared, if Judaism imagines for a moment that it can bring about an international world war for the extermination of the European races, the result will not be the extermination of the European races, but the extermination of the Jews in Europe. I was always derided as a prophet. Countless numbers of those who laughed at the time are no longer laughing today. Those who are still laughing now will perhaps not be laughing much longer.
Danziger Vorposten Daily Newspaper, May the 13th, 1944. Jewry records major losses in other regions of Europe. The core areas of Jewish settlement that we found in Poland, like those in Warsaw and Lublin, have today been neutralized. The settlements of 1.5 million Jews in Hungary are currently being dealt with in a similar fashion. Thus, in these countries alone, 5 million Jews have been eliminated. In other European countries, long-standing state measures against Jewry are also increasing. Wilhelm Löbsack, Provincial NSDAP Propaganda Director in Gdansk, West Prussia.
During a military briefing around autumn 1944, the Reich press chief Dietrich came up with an English report. In this newspaper article, it was alleged that the Russians had taken a German concentration camp by the name of Majdanek. Pictures showed racks, on which a large number of combs could be seen, well laid out, as foreigners expect to see in a German institution. The text said that people had been exterminated here. Dietrich presented the press report to Hitler. We stood there with bated breath to hear what he would say. The answer was swift.
Those are the hands of Belgian children chopped off during the First World War. It's nothing but enemy propaganda.
I believe that I have quoted Hitler's statement correctly. In any case, we were all relieved. Franz von Sonnleitner, after 1939 legation counselor in the Foreign Ministry.
On the third day of the war, I was wounded near Grodno. When I came to, there were many wounded lying on the ground. We were at the mercy of the German soldiers. After a while, those who could move were driven onwards. My comrades grabbed me under the arms because those who fell down were immediately shot. Dmitry Dmitrienko.
Since February 1938, Adolf Hitler has been the supreme commander of the military. In this capacity, he's responsible for the mass killings of Soviet prisoners of war. Whereas 1 to 3% of Anglo-American prisoners die, some 50% of Red Army prisoners perish. Of the roughly 5.3 to 5.7 million Red Army soldiers in German captivity, 2.5 to 3.3 million die. Estimates vary.
Only the gravediggers were given food. The camp was set up in a dense forest, a pine forest. We scratched the bark off with a nail and fed ourselves that way. After a while, the whole forest had been eaten. Boris Sheremet.
Army Command is fully aware of the situation and condones the starvation of Soviet prisoners. In November 1941, when the Chiefs of Staff of the East Armies tell the Quartermaster General that the armies need Soviet prisoners as laborers, but that these are starving in camps, he states,
"Prisoners of war who do not work have to starve. Working prisoners of war can, in some cases, be fed army provisions. Eduard Wagner, Quartermaster General.
Letter to Wilhelm Keitel. The fate of the Soviet prisoners of war is a tragedy of huge proportions. The large majority of them have starved or died from exposure to the weather. Alfred Rosenberg, Minister for the Occupied Eastern Territories.
Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the Armed Forces High Command. Such doubts belong to soldierly concepts of chivalrous warfare. Here we are dealing with the destruction of an ideology. For this reason, I approve and support these measures.
I keep hearing that Hitler could not have known about everything. This is sheer nonsense. I know from personal observation and remarks by Hitler that he knew everything. Heinz Linger, valet to Adolf Hitler.
Up until 1940, Hitler looked younger than he was in reality. After that, however, he aged rather quickly. Up to 1943, he looked his age outwardly. Later, his rapid physical deterioration was obvious. Professor Dr. Hans Karl von Hasselbach, Deputy Attendant Doctor to Adolf Hitler.
The death of a human being didn't bother him at all. He saw people as the links in a long chain, and he considered the first link to be himself. Children were in his eyes only the potential by which the greater or smaller living space of a people was measured. Christa Schröder.
The soldiers that I met were not followers of Hitler and only served the Führer unwillingly, but all approved of war as an indispensable phenomenon of life. The war is the ultimate exertion that you cannot dodge. This picture was deeply ingrained in them. Wilma Sturm, journalist and writer.
Diary. Monday, July the 26th, 1943. Mussolini has resigned. He's said to be ill. Last night, Hamburg, Essen and Kiel were bombed again. Henrietta Schneider.
While I endeavored to establish worthwhile targets to Hitler and the General Staff of the Air Force, our enemies launched 5 big attacks on only one major city, Hamburg. Although this action contradicted all tactical considerations, it had catastrophic consequences. Albert Speer.
Diary of fighter pilot Hans Ahrens, born 1921, killed in action February the 21st, 1944. That first night of terror on July the 25th will remain unforgettable for us and the majority of all Hamburg residents. Personally, I'm glad that I experienced it all. As a soldier, it led to an ultimate, resolute hatred of our enemy.
Letter to Georg Zimmermann, soldier in Norway, from his mother, Hamburg, July the 28th, 1943. Dear Georg, we are still alive, but Hamburg de facto no longer exists. No house left standing, just mountains of rubble, entire streets blocked, dead bodies not salvaged, impenetrable smoke and fumes and fires still burning everywhere. Disintegration is in progress. No police anymore, nothing. Hamburg is lost forever. Magdalena Zimmermann.
When I travelled to the Badine from Babelsberg, I met an acquaintance on the train. He'd experienced it all in Hamburg as an anti-aircraft soldier. It smelled so strongly of corpses that you couldn't get the stench out of your nose. Leaflets were dropped over Hamburg with quotes from the war speeches of Hitler and Goering, without any comments. Erich Kästner, writer, War Diary.
Hamburg, July the 30th, 1943. My Hannele, words can't express what we are going through here. A government that cannot protect its women and children is simply criminal. My Hannele, if I could only hear one word from you and Georg, your mother. Magdalena Zimmermann.
When he traveled to Bavaria to the Berghof, or the Führer headquarters, then he went by train and at night with blacked out windows, so that he wasn't faced with the devastation from the bombing raids. Bernd Freitag von Loinghofen, Captain.
During the entire war, Adolf Hitler never once visited a bombed city. Albert Speer.
Dr. Theo Morell, Adolf Hitler's personal physician. Diary, September the 23rd, 1943, 8:15 p.m. Examination after dinner. Strong flatulence, spasms from agitation, stomach shows increased fat formation. Prescribed a diet.
He admired Morell and his art and was, in a sense, dependent on him and his medication. Albert Speer.
New Year's Proclamation, 1944. The year 1944 will make hard and heavy demands on all Germans. The monstrous events of the war will come closer to crisis this year. We are fully confident that we will endure.
Adolf Hitler.
Diary, May the 27th, 1944. An impression of an increasingly destroyed Berlin. Devastating. At the same time, Berliners are sitting in the sunshine on chairs amid the rubble and debris on the esplanade, as if it were peacetime. Ulrich von Hassel, diplomat and member of the resistance.
Diary, May the 9th, 1944. Patient A, tension headache left side, legs trembling due to agitation. Invasion imminent, but where? Dr. Theo Morell.
The plutocratic world of the West can undertake its threatened landing attempt whenever it wants. It will fail.
Adolf Hitler, Order of the Day to the Wehrmacht.
Hitler was told of the landing on the morning of June the 6th. He expressed relief when he received the first report and said now it would be possible to beat the enemy. Niklaus von Below, Luftwaffe Adjutant to Adolf Hitler.
The conviction of the Germans that we would not attack in the weather then prevailing was a definite factor in the degree of surprise we achieved. In the Omaha sector, an alert enemy division, the 352nd, which prisoners stated had been in the area on maneuvers and defense exercises, accounted for some of the intensive fighting in that locality. Dwight D. Eisenhower, U.S. General, Supreme Allied Commander, Europe.
Heinz Linger, valet to Adolf Hitler. Among Hitler's habits, which despite our efforts couldn't be remedied, was that he kept asking what time it was, above all, during the war.
I principally only ever stop at 12:05.
Adolf Hitler, in November 1942.
On July the 20th, 1944, I'd received the order to prepare for the move of the operations unit from Mauerwald to Zossen, south of Berlin. It was a hot East Prussian summer's day. Mauerwald was located just 20 kilometers away from the Wolfschanze, where Stauffenberg's bomb exploded around 12:45 p.m. Bernd Freitag von Loinghofen.
I remember thunder combined with a brightly flashing flame. At the same time, thick smoke. After a few seconds of complete silence, I heard someone call. It was probably Field Marshal Keitel.
Where is the Führer?
Heinz Buchholz, stenographer in the Wolfschanze headquarters.
There were agitated calls for a doctor. A bomb exploded, nothing happened to the boss, but the hut was blown sky high. Christa Schröder.
Heinz Linger. When I arrived, I saw Hitler, who looked at me inquiringly with big eyes and stared at my troubled face. With a calm smile, he said,
Linger, someone tried to kill me.
Diary. Friday, July the 21st, 1944. The radio broadcast details of the attack. The bomb was planted by a Count von Stauffenberg. Around 1 o'clock, the Führer spoke to prove that he had survived. What would have happened if the Führer had died? The war would be over, and there would be revolution in Germany. Henrietta Schneider.
His confidence, his faith in victory and his assurance, but also his power consciousness and delusions of grandeur now exceeded all boundaries of reason. Traudl Junge, Hitler's private secretary.
Personal War Diary, October the 7th, 1944. Morning briefing. Beginning of the attack on East Prussia and Budapest. Long discussion with Göring. Station 12 heavy anti-aircraft batteries immediately to protect the Führer's headquarters. Keitel for relocating to Berlin, Hitler against it. Werner Kreipe, General of the Aviators, Chief of Staff, Luftwaffe.
In the first days of November 1944, we moved out of the Wolfschanze because the Russians were close by. Traudl Junge.
Germany was under intense pressure. At the end of 1944, weapons production fell sharply. Trapped in the east, southeast, south, and west, Germany was strategically encircled and could not break free. Nevertheless, Hitler took one ultimate measure after the other. The Nazis suppressed without mercy the slightest opposition to their regime. It was clear to us that Germany was mobilizing its last forces, but at the end of 1944, Germany was still able to defend itself and put up serious resistance. Its military still consisted of around 17.5 million men, of whom 5.3 million were fighting troops. Georgy Zhukov, Commander-in-Chief, 1st White Russian Front.
At just 19 years old, Walter was also killed in action. I was sitting on the roof of our house that had been damaged in another bombing when I saw the postman bring the death notice. My aunt called through the house, "Walter has fallen." The death of my brother was a deep shock for me. Helmut Kohl, schoolboy.
Speech to division commanders, December the 12th, 1944, in Adlerhorst, near Ziegenberg, Hesse. If we suffer a few more really hard strikes, then this artificially maintained common front can suddenly collapse at any moment in a huge clap of thunder. Adolf Hitler.
Hitler revealed the following to a very limited circle of listeners.
Due to a noticeable weakness of enemy forces in the Eifel region, he had decided to start the attack from there. The target had to be Antwerp. Siegfried Westphal, Major General, Chief of Staff to the Commander-in-Chief West.
On December the 16th, 1944, General Bradley came to my headquarters to discuss ways and means of overcoming our acute shortages in infantry replacements. Just as he entered my office, a staff officer came in to report slight penetrations of our line. It was through this same region that the Germans launched their great attack of 1940. Dwight D. Eisenhower.
German tanks have been spotted north of the city of Luxembourg. Rundstedt has ordered the tanks to advance through the Ardennes in nearly the same place as the Germans penetrated in May 1940. They're heading in the same direction again, to the Channel coastline towards Antwerp, in order to stop the Allies using the port through which their main supplies come. Stefan Heim, Corporal of the US Army, writer.
It was my opinion that it was necessary to play Hitler's last card to maximum effect. As a Gurkha, I tried to get as close as possible to the front. The troops pushing forward were in a good mood because low-hanging clouds prevented any aerial activity. I was worried that the weather would brighten up. Albert Speer, Memoirs.
As long as the weather kept our planes on the ground, it would be an ally of the enemy worth many additional days. Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Our last major offensive in the West, with 300,000 men that was so gloriously successful at the start, failed in the end thanks to 10 days of radiant sunshine. The Anglo-Americans were thus able to deploy their overwhelming air superiority. Léon de Grelle, commander of the Wallonian Waffen-SS.
The Allies had expected to reach the River Rhine by Christmas at the latest. The Ardennes offensive prevented that. But how many men lost their lives due to this senseless delay? Walter Roland, industrialist, commissioner for tank production in Ministry of Armaments and War Production.
Rudolf Jordan, provincial NSDAP leader, defense commissioner, December the 25th, 1944. When we were sitting together one sunny morning, tears appeared in my wife's eyes. Where will we be at Christmas next year? This was the question asked by the mother of our children, the question of the family's fate. This question would be asked in the house of the provincial leader and everywhere else in Germany. I was frightened because I felt that the answer was no longer convincing, but I had to remain the same person, Hitler's deputy, the spokesman of German hope until the end. I know today that it was the belief in a miracle.
In the days after Christmas, it was clear that the expected success would not be achieved. At the end of the year, the offensive had to be seen as a failure. Nicholas von Below.
Adolf Hitler, at the end of December 1944, to his adjutant Nicholas von Below. I know the war is lost. Their superiority is too great. I will prefer to put a bullet in my head now. We will never capitulate, never. We can perish, but we'll take the world with us.
December the 31st, 1944, Luxembourg. You sat there with a half-empty glass in your hand and listened to the hoarse voice with the unmistakable accent. 2 or 3 times the speaker almost lost his voice. And he also got his words mixed up, but that was always the case when he got excited. It was significant that his throaty bellow no longer wanted to work that New Year's Eve. Stefan Heim, Corporal of the US Army, writer.
Adolf Hitler, last radio address to the German people, January the 30th, 1945. Thus I now appeal to the entire German people to gird themselves with a yet greater, stronger spirit of resistance until we can again, as before, put on the graves of the dead of this titanic struggle a wreath inscribed with the words, "And yet you were victorious." I therefore expect every German to fulfill his duty to the utmost, to make every sacrifice that will and must be required.
February the 13th, 1945. The model of Linz is finally finished. The extensive model of the development of the Danube riverbanks was now set up in one of the large, brightly toned basements of the new Chancellery. When I led Adolf Hitler into this room, he stood for a long time just looking, as though overwhelmed by the general impression. I moved the spotlight to the position of the sun's rays in the afternoon. Now he was presented with the perspective of how his city on the Danube would look in his retirement. Hermann Giesler, General Building Inspector for the redevelopment of the city of Linz.
Not a day went by when the government quarters were not attacked. When a bomb exploded nearby, the bunker lying in the groundwater swayed noticeably. The light began to flicker, so Hitler raised his voice as if in a dream.
That was close. Those bombs could have hit us.
He was noticeably fearful and didn't feel safe. Christa Schröder.
In mid-March 1945, Hitler transfers nearly all of his activities to the bunker under the Chancellery. Since then, he rarely sees daylight.
Sometime in mid-March, Eva Braun arrived at the Reich Chancellery. Hitler tried his best to get her to go back to Munich, but she made it clear that her place was at Hitler's side, and no one would be able to change her mind. Rochus Misch, telephone operator in the Führer's bunker.
April the 20th, 1945 was always referred to as the date of the last photos and film segments of Hitler and the delegation of the Hitler Youth. This is not true. They are in fact from a different reception of a delegation by Hitler. This took place on March the 20th, 1945. Arthur Axmann, leader of the Hitler Youth.
It was between 3 and 4 a.m. on April the 11th, 1945. Suddenly cries were heard. They grew louder and louder. We stumbled outside to discover the cause. "Look, the gate!" somebody shouted. The crooked swastika had disappeared. Something white fluttered on the flagpole. The delightfully victorious minute for which our German comrades had waited for 4,453 days and nights was finally there. In the evening, an American infantry unit arrived. Thomas Geffer, German Jew, prisoner in Buchenwald.
April the 12th, 1945. It will not be pleasant listening. I propose to tell you of Buchenwald. We reached the main gate. The prisoners crowded up behind the wire. There surged around me an evil-smelling stink. Men and boys reached out to touch me. They were in rags and the remnants of uniforms. Death had already marked many of them, but they were smiling with their eyes. Edward Morrow, radio correspondent for CBS News.
On April the 21st, our troops reached the Berlin Autobahn ring. This success created favourable conditions to totally enclose the fascist capital. Vasily Chuikov, General.
That day I saw Hitler only briefly. The boss could still not believe that the Russians were at the gates. Rohus Misch.
Sechlin, Mecklenburg. Around 11:50 p.m., Hitler calls. He gives a short lecture on the situation and concludes with the words,
"You will see, the Russians will suffer the biggest defeat, the bloodiest defeat in their history before the gates of Berlin."
Karl Koller, Chief of the General Staff of the Luftwaffe.
April the 22nd, 1945. This date marks the end of the Third Reich for me. The German Wehrmacht capitulated on May the 8th, 1945. But on April the 22nd, a Sunday, Hitler capitulated. Rohus Misch.
On April the 22nd, we attended the status report at the usual time in the afternoon. I recognized immediately that clouds as heavy as lead were hanging over the room. Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the Armed Forces High Command. Memoirs.
I have already reached my decision. I won't leave Berlin again. I will defend the city till the end. Either I lead the fighting around the capital of the Reich, or I perish with my soldiers in Berlin and die in the battle for the symbol of the Reich.
Adolf Hitler. During the status conference, which had been loud and turbulent, Hitler had finally uttered the magical sentence, and since then repeated it to everybody who crept around the bunker disbelievingly.
The war is lost.
Rohus Misch.
Gertraud Traudel-Junge. In the small anteroom, Hitler stands motionless. In a distant and commanding manner, he calls out,
"Get changed at once. In 1 hour, an aircraft will come and take you to the south. Everything is lost, hopelessly lost."
Eva Braun walks up to Hitler, takes both of his hands, and says smilingly and consolingly, as if talking to a sad child,
"But you know that I'm staying here with you. I will not be sent away."
Hitler's eyes begin to light up, and he does something that no one has ever witnessed, not even his most trusted friends and aides. He kisses Eva Braun on the lips.
The German army dissolved before our eyes. Winston Churchill.
Gloom and doom began to spread throughout the bunker. Arthur Axmann.
The Führer comes up to me, shakes my hand and asks,
"Have you rested a little, my child? I'd like to dictate something. Get the shorthand pad."
Gertraud Traudel-Junge.
"My private will and testament. As I did not consider that I could take the responsibility of contracting a marriage during the years of fighting, I have now decided, before the closing of my earthly career, to take the girl who, after many years of faithful friendship, entered the practically besieged city of her own free will in order to share her destiny with me as my wife. At her own desire, she goes as my wife with me into death. What I possess belongs, inasmuch as it has any value, to the party. Should this no longer exist, to the state. Should the state also be destroyed, no further decision of mine is necessary. Signed, Berlin, April the 29th, 1945, 4 a.m. Adolf Hitler.
April the 30th, 1945. I had close contact with Mohnke, the commander of the citadel. Mohnke was often with the troops on the front line. On April the 29th, he reported to Hitler that to the north the Russians were a short distance away from Weidendammer Bridge, to the east in Lustgarten, to the south near Potsdamer Platz and the Air Ministry, and to the west in Tiergarten. That was only a few hundred meters from the Chancellery. When Hitler asked him,
"How long can you hold out?"
he answered, 20 to 24 hours at the most. Arthur Axmann.
On April the 30th, 1945, around noon, Bormann told me that Hitler's decision was now firm. Then Hitler said to me that he would now shoot himself and that Fräulein Braun would also take her life. The bodies were to be buried. He assigned me to make the necessary arrangements. Otto Günscher, SS Adjutant to Hitler.
My political testament. I die with a happy heart in the face of the immeasurable deeds and achievements of our soldiers at the front, our women at home, the achievements of our farmers and workers, and the efforts, unique in history, of our youth who bear my name. Above all, I oblige the leaders of the nation and those under them to scrupulously observe the race laws and to offer merciless opposition to the poisoner of all peoples, international jury. Issued in Berlin, this 29th day of April 1945, 4 o'clock a.m. Adolf Hitler.
There cannot be the slightest doubt that Adolf Hitler took his life in the Führer bunker of the Reich Chancellery in Berlin on April the 30th, 1945, with his own hand, namely by a shot in the right temple. Cause of death, District Court 2, Berchtesgaden, December the 8th, 1956.
Valet Heinz Linger reports the hour of his death as 3:50 p.m. He says he noted this time from a grandfather clock in the anteroom to Hitler's office. Adjutant Otto Günscher cites his final hour as 3:30 p.m. He said he'd looked at his watch.
It was not disloyalty, but rather his suicide that put an end to Hitler's organization. He and his organization were one and the same, and thus it ended with him. This man who rose out of nothing had offered himself to Germany at a time when it was longing for a new magnet. He formulated a doctrine based on a mixture of fascism and race theory. The totalitarian system allowed him to act without restraint. The mechanization of the military gave him the trump cards of lightning attacks and surprise. All of this led to repression, and that, in turn, led to these crimes. Charles de Gaulle, Memoirs.